আসলে স্যাটিসফাইড এন্ড ইটস রিয়েলি গুড।
মানে রাতের বেলায় ছবি তোলা ইজ নট গোইং টু বি আ ট্রাবল এনিমোর, ট্রাস্ট মি।
লো লাইটে ক্যামেরা পারফরমেন্স এত জোস, মানে বাসায় যদি চোর আসে না ওটা ছবি তুললো চকচকা আসবে।
This mobile gives you the perfect steady video you want. ভিডিও হালকা কাঁপলে ঝট্ট করে চলে যায় ভিডিওর মধ্যে, এইটাই এর মধ্যে নাই।
স্টেবিলাইজড ভিডিওর জন্য দিস ফোন ইজ দ্য বেস্ট।
স্টেবিলিটি দেখার জন্য আমরা আসলে এখন একটা জোরে দৌড় দিব।
স্টেডি ভিডিও ক্যাপচারের জন্য এটা চোর।
60 watt fast charging. Wow. Within 40 minutes তোমার ফোন ফুল চার্জ হয়ে যাবে। Shit. আমি ঘুমাবো কেন?
আর যদি কেউ নতুন কোনো ফোন কিনতে চান, দিস ইজ আ ভেরি গুড অপশন।
এগুলোতে আপনার সুন্দর সুন্দর সেলফি তুলতে পারবেন, সুন্দর সুন্দর ভিডিও করতে পারবেন, তারা এই ফোনটা আসলেও কনসিডার করবে।
অ্যাকচুয়ালি ফোনটা আমার ভালো লাগছে, আমি ফোনটা রেখে দিচ্ছি ভাই, এটা আমি দিব। এই ফোন আমার
This one is amazing. Stay fine and purchase Vivo V21.
পারচেজ ভিভো V20।
Vivo.
Within 40 minutes তোমার ফোন ফুল চার্জ হয়ে যাবে। Shit. আমি ঘুমাবো কেন?
আর যদি কেউ নতুন কোনো ফোন কিনতে চান, দিস ইজ আ ভেরি
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software. With Doodly, you drag, you drop, you tweak some settings, and boom, video done. It'll take you just a few minutes. So, let's hear from the Doodly creator, Brad, to see why Doodly is so easy to use and why you should grab this offer right now.
Hi, I'm Brad Callen, and in this video, I'm going to show you how anyone can quickly and easily create doodle videos, just like the one you're watching right now, using Doodly, our drag-and-drop doodle software that allows anyone, regardless of tech skills, to create highly engaging professional doodle videos in a matter of minutes. Because doodle videos are fun and engaging, they can get you more clicks, likes, shares, and most importantly, sales than any other type of video. Which is why Doodly is now the video tool of choice for over 150,000 businesses all over the world, in virtually every industry and profession that you can imagine. Doodle videos are perfect for marketing, teaching, fundraising, personal use, and even inspiring others. After all, one of the keys to a successful video is to capture your audience's attention and keep it for an extended period of time. And since you're still watching this video, you already know how great doodle videos are at doing just that. Not only are doodle videos incredibly captivating, but research shows that they massively boost learning and memory retention. As a result, viewers really absorb your message, making your videos that much more impactful. And even better, doodle videos can make complex or boring subjects fun and easy to understand. So let me quickly show you how simple and easy Doodly makes it to create an interesting professional video. Alright, here I am inside the Doodly software, which is available for Mac and PC. You'll notice that you can choose the style of your video, selecting from whiteboard, blackboard, greenboard, glassboard, and for more advanced users, you can even use a green screen background, giving you lots of control over the video style. In this example, let's create a nice looking whiteboard doodle video. You'll notice that Doodly makes it super easy to create your own doodle videos with done-for-you scenes, hundreds of characters, a huge selection of props and images, royalty-free music, and even text. And for the ultimate in customization, you can even upload your own images, fonts, props, and music. Now to create a doodle video, it's really simple. First, I'll add a headline to get people's attention, then center it before adding a character. I like this one. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and add a prop too. I'll resize everything and voila, we have Steve reading a book on his chair. For the next slide, I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of adding a character or prop, I'm going to use one of Doodly's super convenient done-for-you scenes. So I'm going to simply drag and drop the scene I want right into my video. As you can see, Doodly is so easy to use that anyone can make doodle videos, even if they have zero tech or design skills. If you can click or drag your mouse, you can create a professional doodle video in a matter of minutes. Not only is creating a doodle video that simple, but we also have a bunch of really cool settings available too. Doodly allows you to customize your video with real hands, cartoon hands, or none at all, seeing transitions with even camera panning, and our smart erase mode to provide the realistic feel that you're looking for. And with just a couple of mouse clicks, you can also easily switch between different doodle video types at any moment. I'll change the doodle video I just created from whiteboard to blackboard in less than 5 seconds. Plus, you can even record a voiceover directly inside Doodly or add background music by simply choosing from our huge royalty-free music library. And of course, you have the option of uploading your own audio and image files as well. You can also select how long it takes the hand to draw something, so scenes, characters, and props are timed perfectly to your voiceover, should you choose to use one. Oh, and one more thing. When you upload your own image, using our enhanced Doodle Draw technology, you can make cool draw paths like this to teach Doodly exactly how you want to draw your imported images. And when you're done, you can preview your video before exporting it to a variety of formats, sizes, and qualities right to your computer, and you're ready to go. As you can see, Doodle videos do an incredible job of educating, entertaining, and selling, making them one of the best investments you can make in your business. And that's especially true right now. The going rate for professional Doodle video creation is anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 to have someone make a video similar to the one that I just showed you. But with Doodly, anyone can create a Doodle video regardless of tech skills and experience, meaning you can make dozens of Doodle videos without paying ridiculously high fees to professional design firms. If you were to visit the Doodly.com homepage right now, you'd see the regular price for Doodly is an ongoing monthly payment, which adds up to $468 per year. But since you've landed on this promotion page, you can get your copy of Doodly right now for a one-time $67 payment. No monthly fees forever. And you'll even have access to all the free feature updates we offer our Doodly users, which is typically once every week. So to lock in this one-time $67 payment with zero monthly fees forever, go ahead and click or tap on the button next to this video to claim your copy of Doodly today. And we look forward to welcoming you to the Doodly family. $67 payment with zero monthly fees forever. Go ahead and click or tap on the button next to
and be tough, quote unquote, on Vladimir Putin.
Maria, thanks so much. I'm here today there in Brussels for the NATO summit. Now, coming up on the program, cryptocurrencies get a boost from Elon Musk's latest tweet about Bitcoin. We'll discuss that with HSBC FX strategist Dominic Bunning. Then, after 12 years in power, Benjamin Netanyahu is unseated as Israel's prime minister. What next for the fragile coalition succeeding him? This is Bloomberg. Cryptocurrencies get a boost from Elon Musk's latest tweet about Bitcoin. We'll discuss that with HSBC FX strategist Dominic Bunning. Then, after 12 years in power, Benjamin Netanyahu is unseated as Israel's prime minister.
इश्क के बारिशों में कहीं भीगने चले तेरी ही ख्वाहिशों में अब लम्हा ये ढले इश्क के बारिशों में कहीं भीगने चले तेरी ही ख्वाहिशों में अब लम्हा ये ढले मौसम की है गुजारिश कर लो रब से सिफारिश जाना तेरे हम सफर तेरे रहबर हम बने ओ यारा मेरे यारा तू ही जीने का सहारा कैसे दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे ओ यारा मेरे यारा तू ही जीने का सहारा कैसे दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे ओ यारा मेरे यारा तू ही जीने का सहारा कैसे दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे मेरे दिल का तेरे दिल से जुड़े कैसे है ये रिश्ते मैं हूँ तेरा हमसाया ऐ काश सनम कह दे इस दिल को मिले राहत मेरे यार तुझे पाकर जो बात दिल में है छुपा बातें समझाऊं रे ओ यारा मेरे यारा तू ही जीने का सहारा कैसे दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे ओ यारा मेरे यारा तू ही जीने का सहारा कैसे दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे दिल की मैं बातें दिल की मैं बातें दिल की मैं बातें समझाऊं रे
লেখাপড়া খেলাধুলা দুষ্টামি করি তাই রোজ খাই দুধ আমি আমার চাই পুষ্টি আমার প্রিয় টেস্টি আমাদের দুধ তাই সবচেয়ে বেস্টি অনেকে বলে এই ইয়াং বয়সে দুধ কেন খাও রোজ আমি বলি এই তারুণ্য ধরে রাখতে রোজ খাই দুধের ডোজ ফিটনেস আমার কাছে সবার চেয়ে দামি তাই আমার ডায়েটে রোজ দুধ রাখি আমি 40 পেরিয়েছি হারেবার রাখা চাই মজবুত তাই নিয়ম করে প্রতিদিন আমি খাই দুধ
আমার ডায়াবেটিস তাতে কি ভাই পুষ্টি ঘাটতি মেটাতে দুধে আয় দুধ বিন্দাস খাই দুধ নেই আমাকে পুষ্টি শক্তি বাড়ায় ক্ষমতা রোগ প্রতিরোধে তাই রোজ খাওয়া চাই নিয়ম করে দুধ ছোট বড় আমাদের সকলে
সব বয়সের সবার জন্য মার্কসের দুধ আদর্শ অনন্য
Sanguine about those risks, and actually that's often when these kind of announcements can have an impact. So I would think that actually with positioning where it is, the actual chance that that tapering discussion, even if it starts to be brought up in very loose terms, possibly the shifting forward of the rate hike dots, for example, those sorts of things, they may bring a bit of short-term positivity to the dollar if we get that coming out on this week.
So, I mean, I guess what market players really want to know is whether, you know, the Fed or when the Fed starts discussions about winding down purchases. When do you think that will be, Dominic?
Look, I mean, I think they're already having some discussions about it, and they'll probably let that on this meeting. But in terms of the very specifics of that discussion, that's going to be waiting, I think, until really Q3, probably the September meeting. So if you were sort of asked for the timeline, I'd sort of say, look, they're discussing it in some respects now. They're only going to give us any detail of how that process will play out in September. And then in December, we should have that tapering announcement. So that's really how I see the timeline. It's still pretty drawn out. And that's why in our base case, we do still see a little bit of dollar weakness against most currencies. But I don't think there's room for a massive dollar weakening. I think it's pretty marginal. And then come the end of the year, when that tapering starts, when all that discussion becomes a lot more pertinent, then I think the dollar will start to gain again.
So, Dominic, is today the right time, for example, to take advantage maybe of some havens like yen?
Yeah, look, yeah, we still like the yen, and I do think there's an element of potential risk aversion coming through. I mean, I think the currency where I still think there's more downside, and you know it's been moving the other way. But I think in sterling, what you've got is a currency story which is incredibly optimistic, very positive from most market players. But I think all the good news is priced in. So if you were to ask me where potentially you get a bit more bang for your buck in terms of you know, dollar doing quite well, it might be against sterling. You know, I think dollar yen is kind of a bit of a range at the moment because it sort of benefits from the risk off element, but it potentially gets hurt if you do have a bit of a push higher in US yields. So it's a bit of a balance there. I would say, you know, if you wanted to buy the dollar, I'd favour buying it against sterling. I think that's probably the best risk reward at this point.
Dominic, thanks so much. Dominic Bunning there of HSBC stays with us. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg First Word News. Here's Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. Benjamin Netanyahu's record run as Israeli Prime Minister has ended. Opposition parties united in a bid to end more than 2 years of political turmoil. The country's parliament has cleared Jewish nationalist Naftali Bennett and centrist Yair Lapid to take over in a power-sharing arrangement, while Netanyahu is now vulnerable to pending graft charges. Passing a budget will be top of the new coalition's agenda. Here in the UK today, Prime Minister Boris Johnson looks set to announce that he will not lift England's pandemic curbs on June the 21st. Johnson and senior ministers have signed off on a 4-week delay, according to reports in the press. This comes as the UK reported more than 7,000 new cases yesterday. Now, that was for a 5th straight day amid a surge in infections linked to the Delta variant. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Francine.
Leanne, thanks so much. Now, coming up, cryptocurrencies get a boost from Elon Musk's latest tweet about Bitcoin. We'll discuss the intersection between digital and fiat currencies with Dominic Bunning. This is Bloomberg.
Right now, about half of U.S. households invest. We'd like to get that number up to 95+%. Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online. It should just be something that people do.
Trading revenues coming in better than expected. Everything cash, $1.4 trillion of cash. One of the most notable aspects of this report that was stellar.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Bitcoin jumped 8%, taking the digital currency above $39,000 following the latest commentary from Elon Musk. In a tweet, the Tesla chief executive said that his company would resume transactions with Bitcoin when mining is done with more clean energy. Now, he also revealed that Tesla sold just 10% of its Bitcoin holdings in the last quarter to prove that the tokens could be liquidated easily without moving the market. Well, we're back with Dominic Bunning of HSBC. Dominic, I know it's extremely difficult to predict prices for Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency, so I won't ask you that. But at the crossroads between crypto and fiat currencies, like, does this blend? What does this become?
Yeah, no, I think it's such early days at the moment. There have been times when it looks like crypto has been driving the rest of the FX market, but the work we've done and when we've looked at it in more detail, really it shows very, very little relationship. And I think today's a really good example of that. When you get a currency, or if you want to call it a currency, an asset being moved 8% on a tweet, look what's happened in the rest of FX. Nothing's really moved. So I don't think we're really at that intersection yet. I think that, currencies as we know them, traditional currencies, remain dominated by those fundamental drivers, and they're not going to be impacted really by what a single person tweets. But I do think potentially it's something we need to consider as we go forward. And obviously central banks are interested in what's happening in the crypto and digital currency space. So it's something that's going to become more important. But right here, right now, it's probably not going to drive fiat currencies all that much, unfortunately.
So Dominic, what does the crypto world evolve into, and what kind of timeline are you looking at?
Well, look, I think it's so open. This is the interesting thing, and I without getting into the debate about it, there are clearly pros and cons of many different cryptocurrencies for various reasons, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Ripple or Dogecoin, for example. There's so many out there that actually seeing how that evolves and whether you get one dominant currency or whether one dominant ecosystem develops, that's still such early days. What I really think is going to be crucial from a broader perspective is how central banks manage this digitization process and how they design their digital currencies, because we are going to get central bank digital only currencies, and whether they manage those in a way that means that individuals like you and I can get a central bank deposit or not, for example, or how that's managed, that could have ripples across the whole of the banking system, across the whole of the financial system. So that's going to be a process that has to be very carefully managed, and we'll start to see that take place over the next few years. But that, I think, is really where the interest will lie for broader markets.
Dominic, I also wanted to ask you about, I know you mentioned actually sterling, but how do you look at it? I don't know whether it's Brexit or just, something else that moves sterling at the moment, but is it range bound, or could it actually move quite significantly from here until end of the year?
Well, look, it has been very, very range bound for a few weeks now, clearly. But I think what that really shows you is almost this trend exhaustion. Everyone's loved the pound for a good few months, bar us. And, we've been wrong, so we'll hold our hands up to that. But I do think at this point that sterling downside looks a lot more likely and could be a lot more aggressive than the move to the upside. And the reason I say that is that a lot of the good news is priced in. I mean, when you look at how UK rates have moved relative to the currency moved a lot further, a lot faster. That's also true from an equity flow perspective. The currency's moved ahead of any potential flows. So all of that good news about the UK reopening and the macro story is priced into the currency. And I think, therefore, the room for disappointment is much greater than the room for overachievement, much like England's football team potentially at this year's Euros, as is always the case. There'll be a lot of optimism going in, but I think actually the risk is to the downside if we don't get that full expectation of good economic news coming through. The pound does look vulnerable because everyone's long, and not many people see it going down.
Yeah. Dominic, I love the football analogy. I'm quite long on, England this year, more than Italy. Dominic Bumming there of HSBC. This is Bloomberg.
It's such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging.
We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
Crypto is a nuanced issue, and it's possible the US gets crypto wrong.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
G7 reset. President Biden lays the groundwork for his global agenda as at the weekend's summit. Now, this week he meets with NATO, the EU, and President Putin. The UK's reopening is set for a delay. Prime Minister Johnson is set to extend the lockdown by an additional 4 weeks amid a surge in the highly transmissible Delta variant. And after 12 years in power, Benjamin Netanyahu is unseated as Prime Minister of Israel, but the fragile coalition succeeding him will be able to maintain their alliance. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Francine Lackman, London. Welcome to Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition on Monday, the 14th of June. So G7 leaders take a strong stance against China's economic aspirations and human rights practices, but they stopped short of an outright condemnation of Beijing as President Biden seeks to build momentum for an international coalition to counter Chinese influence in the world.
You're going to see just straightforward dealing with China. I'm not looking for conflict. Where we cooperate, we'll cooperate. Where we disagree, I'm going to state it frankly.
We definitely have to deal with the fact that China is pursuing a quite successful infrastructure policy. We cannot just stand by and watch.
There will be a need to contest China, particularly in the matters of human rights. And that's where all of us, as a G7 and partners, are aligned in ensuring that we are consistent and united in our approach on these issues.
We must cooperate with China, but we must also be frank about what we do not agree and do not accept. The U.S. president said that silence is complicity.
The G7 is not a club which is hostile to China. It is an international competitor from whom we expect the full respect of all the rules we collectively and voluntarily submitted ourselves to.
And you're looking at live pictures from Brussels, where NATO leaders are meeting. This will be the first summit with Joe Biden as president. Well, Russia is likely to be top of the agenda, with Secretary General Stoltenberg saying this morning that relations with Moscow are at their lowest point since the Cold War. Now, in the past few minutes, we've also learned that leaders will declare China's ambitions a systemic challenge. Well, joining us now is David O'Sullivan. He's a former EU ambassador to the U.S. Ambassador O'Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg. Ambassador, when you look at the G7 and actually what this means as a premise for NATO, it does mean, I mean, it felt like America was back to what we were used to pre-President Trump, but actually tensions still remain.
Well, I think that the G7 showed was the first step of President Biden demonstrating very visibly his recommitment to the multilateral institutions, such as the G7, such as NATO, such as the EU, whom we meet with tomorrow, and his willingness and openness to work with allies to engage on the big issues of COVID, climate, and China, as people have said. And I think in that sense, the meeting was a great success. Of course, there are divergences. There are even just those clips you showed of the different leaders describing dealing with China. There are some nuances to be detected there. But I think the most important takeaway is indeed a renewed sense of commitment amongst the allies to try and address these different issues together.
Ambassador, what exactly are you expecting from NATO? So if you look at the G7, it seemed that there was a pretty united front in how to deal with China. Will they be even tougher on Russia?
Well, I think, the big message is that the U.S. is back, fully committed to NATO. Let's be very honest. President Trump's mandate left people wondering whether you could count on the U.S. in NATO. President Biden is here to emphasize that we can, and that this is going to be a huge boost for the alliance. And yes, I think they will address the issue of Russia, especially in view of President Putin's meeting with Biden's meeting with President Putin on Wednesday, and they will also address, I think, China, and they will address the future development of NATO strategy towards the 2030 objective. And I'm sure they will also talk about the issue of spending and defense spending and whether Europeans do enough, which I think President Biden will still pass the same message as President Trump. We need you to do more.
But Ambassador, what comes after President Biden? So I know it's early days, given he's only become president in January. But do people back in the U.S. watch his every move with allies, watch his every move with China, to then decide whether they want Trump back or not?
Well, I think it's clear that the political situation in the U.S. is very finely balanced. Let's be honest. President Biden won, but he did not. President Trump also did very. Sorry. Yes. So the situation in the United States is very finely balanced, and we could see a change in 2022 in the midterms, or even in 2024. I think the voters of America honestly will be looking more to how the president manages domestic issues, their day-to-day bread and butter issues. But the fact that he is on the world stage, reasserting American leadership, reasserting the alliances, will, I think, add to his image and his domestic strength in the U.S. But he will have to demonstrate that all of this ends up with better outcomes for the American middle class than would be the case otherwise. And that's the key task he has going into the midterms and indeed into the presidential in 2024.
Ambassador, given what we've seen from Russia and Vladimir Putin over the last 5 to 6 years, how should President Biden deal with Russia when the two presidents meet in Geneva on Wednesday?
Well, it's going to be a difficult meeting, I imagine. President Biden says he wants a stable and predictable relationship. I'm not sure that President Putin does stability or predictability. I think he delights in throwing people off course. And there will be quite a lot of contentious issues, whether that's the human rights or allegations of Russian interference in domestic American politics. So both men are going to have to navigate the differences and try somehow to establish a relationship that will enable them to work together in the coming years. So it's a challenging meeting for President Biden. He'll have to calibrate it very carefully, but he will go to Moscow, to Geneva, with a very strong backing from the allies in the G7, in the NATO meetings today, and in meeting with the EU tomorrow. So the choreography of this trip has been very carefully planned, and I'm sure he has a good idea of how he wants to handle the meeting. But it won't be easy, because President Putin is a formidable political operator, as we know, and he will have his own agenda.
Ambassador, thanks so much. Ambassador David O'Sullivan there, the former EU ambassador to the US. Now, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to delay his plan to lift England's coronavirus restrictions on June the 21st. This is because of a surge in the Delta variant first identified in India. Instead, officials expect the Prime Minister to announce a delay of up to 4 weeks when he announces his decision this evening. But there may be some relaxations of restrictions on weddings and major sporting events. Now, at a press conference on Sunday, Johnson said he hadn't yet decided whether to lift social distancing rules.
We're continuing to look at the data. No final decision has been taken, and the right time to fill everybody in on what we're going to do with step 4, with June the 21st, is tomorrow, as I've said, and that's when we'll be putting out the whole package of information so that everybody can see it.
Well, joining us now is Alex Morales, our UK government reporter. Alex, always great to speak to you on this program. So what relaxations are actually planned for June 21st under the government's roadmap, and can we expect them to go ahead?
Well, Francine, as you heard the Prime Minister said, he said that stage 4 of the UK's plan. So we've already had 3 steps of the roadmap, and they've all run on schedule. Most things are reopened, but there's a number of businesses that are still closed. Foremost amongst them, nightclubs have been closed for 15 months, and they're due to open as things stand on June the 21st. The restrictions on the number of guests at weddings is due to be dropped. So at present, you can only have 30 people at a wedding, but the plan would be for anyone to have, unlimited guests at their weddings if they wanted to. And restrictions on the audiences at theatres, concerts, and sports matches would also be dropped. Along with that, you've also got the guidance to work from home. These are all all the final things that are left in place. The government had hoped to drop all social distancing whatsoever on June the 21st, and it looks like now they won't be able to do that. This 4th step will be the one that slips, even after the other 3 have gone ahead on time.
Alex, what are the implications for the Prime Minister of a delay? How much pushback is he actually getting into the House of Commons?
Well, he seems to have his ministers on board, but there is a sort of swathe of backbenchers from his own Conservative Party who have been reluctant to approve restrictions at many of the past stages, and they've dubbed June the 21st Freedom Day, and for them it's sort of become totemic. So he's got a lot of pushback from his backbenchers. Whether they have the numbers to thwart any attempt to delay, we'll have to see. It's important to note that the regulations that the government has expire on June the 30th. Even though the relaxation is planned for June the 21st, the legislation expires on June the 30th. So it looks like he'll probably have to get this through Parliament if he wants to go ahead with a longer delay than the end of the month.
Alex, do we actually understand why this is delayed? I mean, vaccinations are not doing badly at all in this country, in England. At the same time, it seems that people are respecting or could be respecting social distancing. So why can we not reopen on the 21st?
Well, I mean, you'll have seen the figures on caseloads ticking upwards. They've been moving upwards actually quite significantly in the past week or two, and that's all down to this Delta variant, which originated in India and has taken hold and is now the dominant strain in the UK. And I think data shows that it's 40 to 60% more transmissible than the previous dominant strain, which was the one that originated in Kent. So it's taking hold faster, and I think the main concerns from government are that whilst vaccination provides a degree of resistance to the virus, if you've only had one shot, that resistance is 30%. So you've still got significant vulnerability to the virus. Whereas if you have 2 shots, that rises to over 80%. So I think the government wants to have a chance to double shot all the most vulnerable groups. That's everyone over 50. And then you need another couple of weeks after that for the resistance to set in. So that seems to be what the approach they're taking is an ultra-cautious approach because they really don't want to reverse any unlocking steps that they take.
Alex, thank you so much. Alex Morales there, our UK government reporter. Now, Taper Talk returns. Traders, get ready for this week's Fed meeting. Up next, we discuss with Ella Hochschild from Pictet Asset Management. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Wednesday, the Fed decides. Will the Fed react to accelerating inflation concerns? Are members eyeing an earlier rate increase? Coverage begins at 1:30 p.m. on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now let's get straight to your Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Leanne Gehrens. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Francine. Bitcoin has jumped after Elon Musk said Tesla would resume transactions with the cryptocurrency when mining is done with cleaner energy. Musk has whipsawed the price of Bitcoin and other digital tokens over the past few months, ever since announcing Tesla had bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin in February. Apple will stop requiring customers to wear masks at some U.S. stores due to what it says is progress on the pandemic in America. Staff will keep wearing them. Apple was one of the very first companies to close its stores as the outbreak spread across the globe. And Blue Origin has generated $28 million by auctioning a seat to accompany founder Jeff Bezos on his ride into space next month. The company says the identity of the winner will not be revealed for a few weeks yet. Saturday's live auction followed weeks of online bidding with more than 7,000 submissions from 159 countries. All that money, Francine, for an 11-minute flight. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
11 minutes, but what 11 minutes? I mean, Leanne, then this will make your dinner parties for years to come. I mean, imagine the stories, right? Probably worth it. Treasury yields have edged higher as investors prepare for a key Fed meeting later in the week. Now, the central bank is expected to reaffirm that its ultra-loose policy is appropriate and it's too soon to even think about tapering. Officials, though, could project interest rate liftoff in 2023 amid faster economic growth and inflation. That's according to a Bloomberg survey of economists conducted last week. Well, joining us now is Ella Hoekstra, a Pictet Asset Management Senior Investment Manager on the Global Bonds team. Ella, thank you so much for joining us today. What exactly is priced into bonds right now? It seems that all the taper talk that the markets were talking about could already be priced in.
Good morning. Yes, I think the market had excessively underpriced inflation risks starting the year, and then all the way until May, it actually went above and beyond pricing those particular risks as affirmed by the price action over the last couple of inflation prints effectively in the US. So with regards to this particular meeting, the market seems to be a lot more relaxed. It seems to be going along the line of the Fed rhetoric of late and thinking, at least for now, that we will probably be seeing a transitory type of inflation. So that's what's caused quite a bit of stability in rates, particularly in the US.
So, Ella, where do you see the best buy in bonds right now? If you look at globally, where do you want to be invested in?
Right. So we've favored the U.S. in this particular repricing because that's where we've had quite a bit of excessive repricing take place. Australia seems to offer some value as well. But one of the key markets for us year to date particularly has been China. So Chinese local bonds have offered good value because they've also had very good diversifying properties relative to the rest of the rate space. So it's given a global bonds manager a bit of an escape, if you like, from the general repricing in core bond markets. It also, China, we believe, also offers value in terms of tail risks, both on the sort of the more inflationary tail, but also on the more sort of a bit of a slow down, given that we are likely to be facing more of a fiscal, I wouldn't call it a fiscal cliff, but a reduction in fiscal spending relative to the amounts of fiscal spending we saw last year. So that sort of tail risk for growth is also protected out of China, we believe, even better.
I mean, some of the other unknowns, I guess, whether, commodity prices turn into a super cycle or something like that. Then I know you also mentioned U.S. taxes. Is there anything else on the radar that could actually, change the trajectory of some of these bonds?
Well, for us, clearly the key focus is inflation. So we mentioned at the very start of the session that the markets seem to have calmed down about that. But historically speaking, we have a really difficult time with inflation gauges, and that's been the case for central banks as well. So the predictability of inflation is a very difficult game to conduct. And so we like to think around the scenarios of, what can actually go wrong and try to protect the portfolios along those lines. So buy insurance, if you like. And for us right now, it's not our core case for certain, but we like to protect the tail risk of a potential inflation overshoot. So, we deem that scenario to be probably on the 15% probability range, but it is one that is absolutely worth protecting for global investors. And, on that round, things like the dollar, things like curve flattener positions, and also Chinese local bonds that I mentioned earlier are good hedges. So for us, that probably remains the most crucial component for rates more broadly into the rest of this year.
Ella, thanks so much. Ella Hoxha there, Pictet Asset Management Senior Investment Manager on the Global Bonds team. Now, coming up, after 12 straight years in power, Israel's parliament voted out Benjamin Netanyahu from his post of Prime Minister. We discuss the new coalition next. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Every Friday with 30 minutes dedicated to fixed income, I'm Jonathan Ferro. This is Bloomberg Real Yield.
Economics, finance, politics. This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lachman here in London. Now, it's the end of an era in Israel. Nationalist politician Naftali Bennett has been sworn in as prime minister overnight in Jerusalem.
I, Naftali
Bennett, son of the late Jim Yaakov and Myrna Leah, accept the obligations of Prime Minister to uphold the values of the State of Israel and its laws, to fulfill my duties and enact the decisions of the Knesset.
Well, that's after the Israeli parliament approved a new government, effectively ousting Benjamin Netanyahu as leader after a record 12 consecutive years. Now, there is quite a lot of geopolitics, of course, dominated over the weekend at the G7 over in Cornwall. Now, you're seeing live pictures from Brussels, where the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is speaking at a NATO panel ahead of the leaders' meeting. This will be the first summit with Joe Biden as president. Of course, you can watch all of that on Live Go, L-I-V-E Go, on your Bloomberg terminal. A lot of the focus, of course, is on how some of the leaders will deal with Russia after a pretty strong rebuke or strong words against China over at the G7. It does seem that they have a united front. Again, we'll see whether that's true and whether it holds, but something that we need to keep a very close eye on. Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition continues in the next hour. Matt Miller joins me out of Berlin. Kaylee Lyons out of New York. The focus, of course, is on what markets are also doing. So a lot of geopolitics, and we expect Prime Minister Boris Johnson to possibly delay the reopening. It was scheduled for June the 21st. We understand through insiders that actually these COVID rules could be delayed, or the COVID reopening could be delayed by as much as 4 weeks. Then, U.S. equity futures and stocks posting modest gains this Monday. Again, investors preparing for a key Federal Reserve meeting later in the week, I guess, with so much anxiety out there on the markets about the Fed's plans to scale back monthly stimulus injections ebbing. We're seeing bulls coming back to actually try and put their dominance in place. So it's going to be a very exciting Federal Reserve meeting. We'll have, of course, a full roundup of the news on the markets. We'll look at bonds, currencies, and equities. Investors anticipating that the central bank will pretty much reaffirm the pace of bond purchases this week, even if it delivers projections for interest rate liftoff in 2023. And it's really these projections about liftoff in terms of interest rates that the markets will be watching out for. So we'll have plenty more. That's coming up shortly. This is Bloomberg.
We've sadly lost 12,000 premises across the sector as a whole. We lost about 330,000 additional staff in terms of headcount through the pandemic. It is a gradual road to recovery, but I am feeling much more optimistic. The positive response we've seen from consumers in returning to eating and drinking out, even outside, has been very welcome. And of course, we're not out of the woods yet, because we know that about 20% will struggle to reopen with social distancing restrictions, and every day that they are closed makes it less likely that they'll be able to reopen. So I think you will see continued business failures within hospitality over the course of the next year. Well, I think the government support has been unprecedented. Equally unprecedented is the hit that hospitality has taken. So we do need the government to look at a solution on rents. which is going to be critical to recovery, a recapitalization strategy to tackle the levels of debt that these businesses are going to come out of the pandemic with. So this government support, fantastic, has allowed us to maintain a large number of staff that we would have undoubtedly lost along the way had we not had furlough. But furlough actually is costing the businesses to implement at the moment, and the costs of staying closed, the industry is burning through £500 million a month in ongoing costs.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
BSO Now is your online home for brand new Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. Discover new releases each week that include behind-the-scenes storytelling with conductors including music director Andris Nelsons, guest composers and musicians, plus critically acclaimed archival concerts and more. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsored by Bank of America.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Actually, what happened at this summit was that there was a colossal amount of work on subjects that had absolutely nothing to do with Brexit.
This is not a contest about who can do better in front of a press conference or try to embarrass each other. It's about making myself very clear.
And that's where all of us as a G7 and partners are aligned in ensuring that we are consistent and united in our approach on these issues.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance, Early Edition, with Francine Lacqua, Matt Miller, and Keely Lines.
Well, it's 10 a.m. here in London, 11 a.m. in Berlin, 5 a.m. in New York, and 5 p.m. in Hong Kong. And our top stories today. The G7 summit wraps with COVID, China, and climate in focus. But despite a show of unity, hints of tensions and contradictions remain amongst leaders. Biden's European tour continues. The U.S. president meets with NATO, the EU, and President Putin this week. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson looks set to delay the UK's reopening amid a surge in cases of the Delta variant in England. Now, all of that, of course, will also be overshadowed by the huge importance of the Federal Reserve. It meets later this week, Kaylee, and the focus is on when they'll maybe hint at when they could start tapering or moving interest rates. And that's definitely what the markets are watching.
Yeah, will they talk about talking about tapering, or will they just straight up talk about tapering? That's what we're waiting to see on Wednesday. And ahead of that, the market is really just holding its breath. I would note in the Asian session, volume was a bit light because we did have holidays in Australia, China, and Hong Kong. So keep in mind, if you check out Map Markets Go on the terminal, the moves you're seeing for those countries are from last week. Stocks that were open, though, include in Japan, where the Nikkei was higher by about 0.75%. And I wanted to point out Indian equities as well. The Sensex at one point was lower by about 0.5%. It has inched higher into positive territory by about 0.1%. And that is after we got inflation data out of India. Wholesale prices at the highest in 3 decades. So some of those pressures really are building. And after that data, the Indian rupee is weaker against the U.S. dollar by about 0.25%. The Japanese yen, meanwhile, is stronger. We're sitting right around 109.65. As for what the picture looks like here in the U.S., as we await the Fed on Wednesday, we are sitting at all-time highs. We closed at a record on the S&P 500 on Friday. We're just inching higher from that level this morning. Futures up about 4 points on S&P E-minis. We're steady in the Treasury market around 1.45% after that huge decline we saw in yield last week. It is a bond market that clearly is positioned for a continually dovish Fed. I would also note that oil is moving higher. We're up 1% on WTI, above $71 a barrel. And then in crypto, Bitcoin is coming down a bit, but it rallied 9% yesterday to right around that $39,000 level. You can thank Elon Musk making yet another pivot, saying that if mining becomes more focused on clean energy, Matt, then Tesla will allow transactions using the cryptocurrency once again.
Yeah, well, once again, Elon Musk, kind of the tail wagging the dog here. But I'll leave crypto aside for now. Take a look at European markets. We are higher pretty much across the board. You can see the Republic of Ireland is down, but everyone else is gaining. The Stock 600, the broader index, is up right now. And the pound, I think, is very interesting to watch as we worry about delays to the reopening in the UK. Traders seem to have taken it out on the currency. So the pound sterling losing a little bit of ground against the dollar. Important to note that it's at a relatively high level at above $1.40. But then a couple of big movers here. Philips, I think a really important mover, a recall on a lot of the sleep apnea masks because of potentially toxic foam in those products. As a result, the stock hit almost 5%. And Ferrari also down after Goldman Sachs does a double downgrade directly from a buy to a sell, saying that CapEx is going to soar as the company makes a switch to electric vehicles. So this is a stock that, you know, Francine, has outperformed everybody for years, and all of a sudden this year the reckoning has come with ESG investors and Ferrari a little bit late to the game.
Yeah, so I know, Matt, you would definitely watch the car makers more than anyone I know, certainly in financial news. And the focus is on, how you make these electric cars for these like super fast cars that cost like hundreds of thousands, even $500,000, but still having the engine that does that noise that people love.
They're going to give up the engine noise. That's the decision. If you look at exotic car makers like Rimac, there is no noise except for the whir of the electric motor, which itself is kind of cool but very quiet.
All right, you have to do a test drive for us, Matt, and report back.
Yes,
now
I
look
do.
at what's ahead this week. Today, Boris Johnson will announce whether or not to extend COVID restrictions in England. The NATO summit will also be held in Brussels. Tomorrow, the EU and the US hold a summit, which Joe Biden will attend. Wednesday, we'll get the latest Fed decision. News conference from Jay Powell. That's a big one for the markets. President Biden also meets Vladimir Putin in Geneva. Interesting to see the tone and body language amongst the two leaders. And then on Friday, we get a rate decision from the Bank of Japan. So there's quite a lot going on. And if you look at, of course, what the NATO leaders would focus on, it's probably on Russia after the G7 leaders over here in England at the weekend were pretty harsh on China, and they seem to have a united front. I don't know whether we have live pictures or not of NATO leaders. Just moments ago, Justin Trudeau was speaking in a panel. I think Boris Johnson has just arrived there with his iconic hair, really.
He's in a hair contest with Trudeau, Francine.
Yeah, I would argue not the same look. We will have plenty more from Boris Johnson to see whether the alliance holds or not. Now, the NATO summit, of course, follows this weekend's G summit. So let's get straight to Maria Tadeo in Brussels. Maria, if you look at the G7 meeting, they had a united front in how to deal with China. Will we have the same with NATO on how to deal with Russia?
Well, Francine, that is the goal. And in fact, you're very right to point out that there was a joint position to come out of the G7. There was a joint statement, 25 pages. And by itself, that is a highlight. I'm sure you remember during the Trump presidency, there was no joint communique simply because he would not sign on to the conclusions. Now, when it comes to NATO today, it really is about Russia, and it really is about taming some of the Russian interference that we're seeing in Eastern Europe, the Polish, the Ukrainians, the Lithuanians, very concerned about what they deemed has been very aggressive behavior from Russia in the past few months. And of course, this is coming just 2 days before he heads to Geneva to meet Putin. Now, the goal for the Americans here is to put a united front and to get to this meeting with leverage and kind of in a position to be able to say the Western powers and NATO are fully behind President Biden, and he's going to get tough on Putin.
Yeah, and Maria, we understand that UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is discussing Russia right now as he arrives at that NATO summit. Other than the Russia issue, what else is going to be the focus for NATO over there in Brussels?
Look, I think it will a lot be about Russia, and Russia will take center stage. I think what is also key is to look at the fact that in every previous NATO summit under Trump, there was this fixation with the 2% spending, that these countries, rich countries, need to pay more to this protection and this joint venture that is NATO. Now, it's interesting that this year the Americans, of course, they say they still want countries to pay into this, and NATO needs this, but it's not as confrontational as it was. I have to tell you, I haven't really heard a lot of chit-chat here about the 2%.
Maria, thanks so much. Maria Tadeo there in Brussels covering NATO for us. Boris Johnson speaking there at NATO, also looking set to announce later today, that he won't lift England's pandemic curbs on June the 21st after a rapid surge in the Delta variant. Well, joining us now, Sam Fazeli, who leads pharmaceutical coverage for Bloomberg Intelligence. Sam, as always, thank you. So is the Delta variant not, can it get through vaccines, or is it that the UK population has not been vaccinated enough to warrant protection?
Good morning, Francine. You have both problems, in fact. So there's a whole host of people who have not. So 45% approximately of the UK adult population has not been vaccinated with 2 doses yet. And 1 dose isn't sufficient to really stop the infection. Maybe it reduces the severity of the disease a little bit, but certainly not the infection, and maybe at about 30% at best protection so far based on the data we've seen. So you have a problem with both of those issues that is causing a bit of a headache in the UK.
If they stretch the reopening 4 weeks later, does that give the UK enough time to give people enough second doses, to get enough people vaccinated to take care of this outbreak?
That is an excellent question, Matt. And I think that would mean that would probably be at about a 60, 70, well north of 60% of adults fully vaccinated in about 4 weeks' time. But the question is, if the decision about reopening, etc., is made based on the number of cases, that still leaves a large percentage of people who are going to be testing positive if we continue down that path.
All right, well, we will all await what that decision is. Thank you so much to Sam Fazeli of Bloomberg Intelligence. I do want to take a quick look at some stocks moving in pre-market trading here in the U.S. now. And of course, I have to begin with a meme stock because, yes, those are still some of the biggest news makers in the equity market. AMC, of course, one of the poster children. It rallied 15% on Friday, and those gains continue on this Monday morning. Shares up about 3% in early hours. I was also mentioning Elon Musk's pivot on Tesla and Bitcoin once again, saying they will allow transactions in the cryptocurrency once more clean energy is used for mining. And on the back of that, Bitcoin got a little lift. So too do Bitcoin-tied stocks in pre-market trading. MicroStrategy, one of them, up 4.5%. And Tesla, for its part, I would note, also is higher, not as large of a gain, but still that stock up about 0.8% before the bell, Francine.
Yeah, we have a lot going on, and Tesla never far from, of course, what we're looking at. Coming up next, Christian Keller, Barclays Head of Economics Research. We'll talk to him about the Fed. Maybe he'll have a thing or two to say about Bitcoin and Tesla. And then a little bit later, Joyce Chang, JP Morgan Chair of Global Research. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Surveillance puts global markets into perspective.
We're going to try to fold an economic theory here with what we've got.
Based on data.
The focus is going to be on the data, the manufacturing data.
How the market responds will be really interesting.
Timely conversations.
Part of getting out of this hole is big fiscal.
Keeping you up to date on trends.
When do you take this thing off?
So you put it on to take it back off.
Wake up with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz. Weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance. I'm Matt Miller in Berlin, along with Kayleigh Lyons in New York and Francine Lacqua in London. Now, I have a chart here that I'm pretty excited about because it sets up the Fed this week. And really, the same can be said of most Western central banks. The risks around their decisions this week and in the coming weeks are really asymmetric because everybody seems to be on one side of the trade. We welcome our viewers on Bloomberg Radio every day at this hour. What we're looking at here on this chart is the drop in yields that we've seen 4 weeks now in a row, and last week was the biggest drop in yields we've seen in over a year. So people are piling in to treasuries even after the big CPI and other inflation prints that we've seen. And Christian Keller joins us right now from Barclays. He's their head of economics research. And Christian, why is it that everybody believes the Fed is going to hold true? Everybody believes central banks are going to hold this push against inflation.
First of all, I would say that most people are quite puzzled and have been quite puzzled about it. It's easy at the end of a week to rationalize things and, why this has happened. And, you say people have been piling into treasuries. It's probably also people getting squeezed out who had short positions. But what is fascinating is that in light of data coming in that tells us a lot about more bottlenecks and persistent supply side pressures and a CPI print in the US, it was 5% headline year on year. Surprising on the upside, markets actually took, at least yields in the US in a way went down below 1.5%. So I think what they're telling us is that with the message from the ECB last week and with the expected message from the Fed this week is that central banks, there's enough uncertainty for central banks to tell us, look, we will look through this for now. There are a lot of signs that this is transitory. Used cars will not continue to go up in price. And, markets by now say, look, if it's uncertain, if I won't be able to tell the outcomes of the US labor market in particular for another 6 months or so, it's difficult to bet against central banks at the core who told us that they will remain dovish and they will look through this, and they firmly believe that this is transitory.
There was a big note out last week from David Folkers-Landau and the team at Deutsche Bank. There was another note out from Andy Haldane saying, look, this is a serious spot we're in, the danger zone, you might say. Today, ECB Governor Holtzman came out and said they're not in a dangerous zone for inflation, but we haven't seen this kind of fiscal increase. We haven't seen this kind of monetary help, and especially in concert, right, since World War II. Isn't there going to be persistent inflation that has to come along with that?
Look, I agree with you that the threat probably is bigger than it has been for a while. And, I looked a little bit recently at what happened in the US in the 60s, right? Because there you also started off with very low inflation expectations. And typically we remember the 70s with the oil price spikes. But actually, things became unanchored in a way during the second part of the 60s already. Now, why are markets not reacting more? I think for two reasons. First, you say on the monetary side, I think that we have seen before. And the new issue is here that it comes with a lot of fiscal support. But what I also read is the markets are no longer sure how much of that $4 trillion spending package that the US administration proposes will really come through. And I think there's now the feeling that maybe it will be a lot less. And if you believe that, then suddenly in 2022, you actually have some, I don't want to call it a fiscal cliff, but you'll have a significant reduction of the fiscal impulse. And if the same happens in Europe and elsewhere, I think markets believe that with growth already peaking probably now, going to be strong this year, but peaking in momentum terms, and then, fiscal dropping off next year, regardless of the rhetoric, they believe, why should inflation then really be persistently higher against a target where the Fed has told us they want to actually overshoot 2% somewhat?
But Christian, how much of the inflation overshoot or certainly tapering is already priced into the markets?
Right now, if you look at the break-evens, all the way out to 30 years, they're relatively, mildly pricing inflation. 10-year break-evens, I think 2.3 or so. So I would say what they are pricing right now is almost exactly what the Fed would want. But what they're not pricing, I believe, is really something that is out of control, where the Fed suddenly does not have just a moderate overshoot, but gets something more. And I think the risk here is also that with the Fed policy and their determination to stay, dovish, is that we're going to see late hikes, but maybe more than the market is pricing now. So we believe markets are not priced for this upside surprise.
Okay.
We do believe that steepening in curves is probably what markets should positioning for.
So, Christian, will we see a move in the dots this week?
That is in a way next to the language around tapering the key issue. We think a few people, maybe two may move. You may get an exact split in the dots with regard to will they hike in 23 or not. The market, of course, the futures are pricing already a hike in early 23. So compared to the market, the Fed will stay dovish. But I could imagine that there'll be, two dots possibly moving a bit closer with regard to where they see the first hike.
Christian, thank you so much. Christian Keller, their head of economics research at Barclays, joining us this morning. Now, coming up a little bit later on G7 and NATO, we talk to a former British ambassador to the U.S. He's Peter Westmacott. We'll ask him how both allies should deal with Russia and China. This is Bloomberg.
We're now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution.
The battery problem may be the biggest unsolved problem in all of technology.
Every time the United States has done great transformative things, there's been a partnership between government and the private sector.
With a willing partner to ensure competitiveness and draw in investment in the United States, Canada's going to be able to be even more ambitious.
The objective for Glasgow, first and foremost, is to keep that 1.5 degree temperature rise within reach.
The train has left the station. Investors care about it. People who work inside of corporate America care about these issues. And certainly we see that with just the broader community.
There's not enough tax in the world for private sector to pay for all of this. It's going to have to be a public-private partnership.
curtain will rise again.
Broadway's returning June.
Have you bought tickets?
Is busted out.
You've got more time here. Have you got
Commodities are up.
Keep going.
To the
Oh,
moon.
no.
Beautiful.
Bloomberg Surveillance, weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Trading revenues coming in better than expected. Everything cash, $1.4 trillion of cash. One of the most notable aspects of this report that was stellar.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lapp in London, Matt Miller in Berlin, Kaylee Lyons in New York. Now let's get straight to the Bloomberg. First word news on President Biden's quest to enact his $4 trillion economic agenda enters a turbulent new phase today. The House comes back into session and Democrats are ramping up pressure on the Senate to produce a bipartisan compromise. Now, a key challenge is that the fast-track budget process that progressives want to use will only be available if all 50 in the Senate Democratic caucus agree to take that step. Iran is said to, or says it has reached a broad agreement with the U.S. over the lifting of sanctions on its industrial sectors, including energy. But the country is warning there is, quote, very little time left for world powers to revive a 2015 nuclear deal. The trade restrictions have all but prevented the Islamic Republic from exporting oil. Now, oil markets are keeping a close eye on the talks taking place in Vienna. And Benjamin Netanyahu's record run as Israeli prime minister has ended. Opposition parties united in a bid to end more than 2 years of political turmoil. Now, the country's parliament has cleared Jewish nationalist Naftali Bennett and centrist Yair Lapid to take over in a power-sharing arrangement, while Netanyahu is now vulnerable to pending graft charges. Now, passing a budget will top the new coalition's agenda. Finally, Bitcoin has jumped after Elon Musk said Tesla would resume transactions with the cryptocurrency when mining is done with cleaner energy. Musk has whipsawed the price of Bitcoin and other digital tokens in the past few months, ever since announcing Tesla had bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin in February. I mean, I love the fact that actually he tweets and everything moves. What I don't really understand is that there's not an infinite, way of actually changing the way you mine Bitcoin, right, Matt? So it's unclear whether Bitcoin can become any cleaner.
I agree 100%. Of course, it could become cleaner, but what's the metric? Like, who's out there measuring the way every miner is conducting his or her business? I don't get why that statement is enough to move this asset, but there you go.
It's 2021. Do we have to have a real reason why Elon Musk on Twitter can move Bitcoin to such a degree, Matt? But to your point, there are estimates out there. Some people say that about 39% of mining is powered by renewable sources at this point. Of course, Elon Musk said in that tweet yesterday he wants it to get up to 50%. So I don't know what metrics Elon Musk is looking at, but it's just a question of when exactly we're going to get there and Tesla's going to start accepting Bitcoin for transactions again, Francine.
Yeah, I just love the story. It's just like the story that keeps on giving. And unclear where Bitcoin ends up, but our resident expert Matt Miller is very excited. Coming up, maybe we'll talk Bitcoin as well. Joyce Chang, she'll have a thing or two to say about Bitcoin, as do you, Matt.
I just don't love the story. I love the asset class. I love cryptos, the space, the community, but I don't love the story of Elon Musk moving it up or down with a tweet. It hurts me. Right here, okay, Francine.
We'll see.
For those on radio,
Joyce
Matt is
Chang
pointing to his heart.
This is Bloomberg.
announcing a project and doing a project is something different. And that's why we are so proud. We have started now the first one here. It's running, and I believe that we will see scalability. We have now a base to show use cases, so we can develop new cases on how to build a hydrogen economy.
Valuations, particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, Matt Miller in Berlin, Katie Lyons in New York. A lot going on, Matt, in the world of geopolitics. Of course, leaders meet in Brussels today for NATO, US-EU meeting tomorrow. Then, the big one, Vladimir Putin meeting with Joe Biden in Geneva. But actually, moving the markets will be the Fed.
Yeah, the Fed for sure, and we're focused on that. But I think the geopolitics has been so exciting over the past weekend, Francine. It doesn't look like, well, Biden isn't going to be able to stop Nord Stream 2. He didn't get the kind of opposition that he wanted from the G7 on China. And the U.S. was basically the only country to make big vaccine donations. Biden promised $500 million, and then the other 6 of the G7 countries came up with 113 million doses. So he's doing his best for sure.
Yeah, it certainly is. How's it all playing out in the markets, Kaylee?
Well, Francine, I'm going to say something I feel like I've said a lot recently, and that is that I'm looking at record highs on both sides of the Atlantic. Granted, once again, the moves aren't massive. The Stock 600 is at an all-time high, but off the highs of the session and only up about 0.2%. Here in the U.S., S&P 500 futures are higher by about 3 points or so after closing at a record on Friday. And in the Treasury market, we're steady right around that 1.45% level. We're hovering around the lowest levels that we've seen in about 3 months ahead of that Wednesday Fed decision. The question is, do we get a hawkish surprise that maybe moves some things in the bond market? We will all have to wait 2 days to have that answer. And then, of course, we've been talking about crypto all hour, and Elon Musk moving the market once again with a tweet about Tesla accepting Bitcoin for transactions once there's a little bit more clean energy involved in mining. So Bitcoin's hanging out right around that $39,000 level. No surprise, the fact that Bitcoin moved higher by about 9% yesterday before stocks were trading here in the U.S. They're playing a bit of catch-up in pre-market trading. Some stocks tied to cryptocurrencies, including Marathon Digital, which is a Bitcoin miner. It's higher by 7.5%. You have Riot Blockchain moving to the upside as well. Then, of course, we have a little bit of a lift for some of those meme stocks. AMC is higher by 2.25%. And then, Matt, you mentioned this one, so I threw it on the board just for you. The ADRs of Ferrari down about 3% after that double downgrade at Goldman Sachs.
I will tell you something very interesting. Usually they would be ADRs, but Ferrari actually listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I know that because I was there on the floor with Piero Ferrari and Johnny Elkann. It was one of the more exciting days of my life. Now, speaking of exciting, Francine, I have a chart of European bank stocks. And I'll tell our listeners on Bloomberg Radio what I'm showing you. There were so many to choose from because the excitement around EU bank stocks has been building over the past couple of weeks. This shows the gap between the U.S. bank stocks performance in blue, note, They've done incredibly well, and European bank stocks in white. Now, when you look at it like this, it doesn't look like European bank stocks are much of a success story. But trust me, on their own, they have rallied 76% from the bottom. They're almost back to pre-pandemic levels. People have a lot more faith in them, and they're still at lower valuations than they were in 2019. So there's a lot to talk about around EU bank stocks.
I love that chart, actually. I pushed it out on social media a little bit earlier, Matt. One of my favorite charts, especially seeing the rally that the EU banks had last year. Now, talking about the banks, about valuations, but also in general about the markets. From New York is Joyce Chang, Chair of Global Research at JP Morgan. Joyce, thank you so much for joining us. I know Matt wants to go to the banks in a second, but overall, when you look at what's been discussed at the G7, NATO, our relationship with China and Russia, does that change any of your forecast, or is it just geopolitics that for the moment doesn't impact supply chains, doesn't impact trade?
I think the U.S. is putting out a very strong message that they want an alliance of the democracies against the autocracies. But the rest of the world is basically saying, you know, look, I mean, we need to balance all of our interests, and we're still coming out of this recovery. So I don't actually think that it changes the story that much. I mean, the story is still the U.S. recovery marches on, and that's going to be very strong, you know, through the third quarter of the year. But the rest of the world, Europe is also going to come out of this. So we talked about European banks stocks, but we see in the third quarter of the year, European growth coming back nearly 15% in the third quarter. So the U.S. has started out ahead, but Europe is going to catch up. And I agree that the bank stocks still look attractive here. We also think the energy sector looks attractive here.
So, Joyce, overall, when does the Fed actually start tapering? Are they 6 months to a year ahead of the ECB?
I think that this is probably, you know, early next year where you begin to really see more action about this. The market has now accommodated, you know, the talk, and that's sort of in the marketplace. And I think Treasury yields should move up from here. I mean, we've been surprised by how subdued they are. So I would expect that move to occur, and that you're seeing more of the actual tapering talk, you know, early next year. But I think, you know, you've seen the market go through a number of different phases. First, there was the anticipation of the taper talk, then the actual, you know, the actuality of it actually had Treasury yields coming down. But we're surprised by where break-evens are and where Treasuries are at right now. And we do think that this is a point where U.S. Treasury yields are set to rise in the next couple of weeks and months.
It's like that wherever you look, Joyce. This morning, I spent some time on the terminal going around to different regions, and yields have come down everywhere. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at almost negative 10 basis points on bunds, and now we're back down at negative 26. The same is true if you look at gilts. Why is it that the market all of a sudden believes the major central banks are going to look through this inflation?
Well, I think some of this for U.S. Treasury, at least, has been positioning. I mean, we think there's probably another 30 basis points that you could actually see this move. And you had such front-loaded moves earlier in the year. But from the ECB, you've had the message of, you know, just keeping with the asset purchases. So I think that, you know, there's a sense that, you know, still there's going to be more caution coming from the ECB side. But on 10-year yields, I mean, we're still very comfortable that you're going to see this approaching sort of the 2% mark by the end of the year. So I've been surprised by just, you know, how the response has been, particularly given the inflation prints that we've seen, and that we're likely to see inflation elevated for the next couple of months.
So is the biggest downside risk potentially a hawkish Fed surprise?
You know, I think that the Fed, you know, messaging actually has been pretty consistent here. You know, they have been, you know, talking about tapering, and there's talk, but there's not going to be, you know, much action on that. Now, we've moved up our call on when we expect the Fed to move, you know, to 2023, but that's still, you know, quite a long time away. So I think the market has already priced in quite a lot. What I would expect is that you would see Treasuries move from the current levels that we're at. And I think the inflation is still going to remain on everyone's mind as well, but I think you do see a peak coming in the next few months. You know, travel is going to continue to pick up. But I think U.S. equities here are going to continue to perform well, with Europe catching up over the next few months. So still strong outlook for the equity markets.
Joyce, I mean, the equity market in Europe, because it's been undersold a little bit, or actually do you see value in the U.S.?
I mean, we're looking to 15 to 17% upside and for value and cyclical leadership here. We really do prefer the domestics over the exporters, the periphery to the core, but we do see energy sector across the board still having value here. We have oil going to $80 later in the year, and at $70 per barrel, this is the highest levels we've seen since May of 2019. And we still have this recovery online because the travel will pick up from this period through August, through the summer months.
Joyce, when you look at some of the things looking for the summer, are we underestimating the impact that some of these variants could have? I know, especially in the U.S., there's a feeling of reopening, that actually everything's fine, we're on a strong trajectory for the recovery, but then you look at the U.K. and they're thinking about delaying the full recovery and it's the full reopening, and it's unclear why that is.
I think the vaccination rates, at least those with one dose, have gone up quite a bit in the U.S. and Europe as well. But I think the Europe is being cautious, just given the experience we've had. But we are beginning to see that just the correlation between the vaccinations and the mobility in the developed countries. I do see that reopening momentum is still there. The travel sector is going to benefit. Value, cyclical leadership. I mean, we would still keep with those themes through the summer months. And I also do think that energy prices will continue to be strong, just given the demand factors that are in place right now.
I mean, given the demand, given the pent-up savings we hear so much about, Joyce, what happens if inflation stays at, relatively high levels, possibly uncomfortable levels? What do you buy to hedge?
Well, I still think that commodities are probably still the best hedge that you can do here. That's to me the one that's it's traditional. It's not necessarily the boldest answer out there, but I think commodities are the best way to hedge. One thing that we've also seen is that the bond equity correlation has turned positive again, and that could increase the demand for commodities as a diversification benefit as well as a hedge against inflation. So I would stick with commodities here.
Joyce, I'm not sure if Bitcoin is a commodity or if it is a currency, but I'm curious how you're viewing it.
Well, I think for sure the volatility we've seen is a setback to the institutionalization of Bitcoin. There's a lot of talk about whether this could be a substitute for gold, but when we see the volatility that has been in place, I do think that just institutionalization of this asset class is going to take a lot longer. Now, we have a lot of fair value models, as do others, but we've looked at the lowest cost mining, and then we've really looked at what would happen if it could take the place of gold. And you have a very, very wide range here. So I think that institutionalization of Bitcoin is going to come much more into question, just given the magnitude of the volatility and the moves that we've seen over the last few weeks.
So, Joyce, when could realistically, in terms of timeline, could it ever actually, replace or at least try and have an impact like gold has, or is it just disconnected at the moment?
I think it's disconnected at the moment, Francine, because when you take a look at the volatility, you've had like 4 to 6 times the volatility of gold. So talking about a replacement is, I think, very difficult to envision for institutional investors. And then you have the ESG concerns on top of that. Looking at the inflows, we've seen about, 14 billion of inflows since last fall, but you've had the market cap go up as much as $800 billion over that same period of amount of inflows. So I think the concerns about asset valuation, some of the ESG concerns as well on where the mining takes place, and the volatility all mean that this is something that will continue to have a great deal of interest, but the speculative aspects of it have become very clear over the last few weeks.
Joyce, thank you so much. Joyce Chang there, Chair of Global Research at JP Morgan. Now, coming up, Peter Westmacott, former British ambassador to the U.S. We'll talk about the G7. We'll, of course, talk to NATO, and we'll talk about the Geneva summit between Biden and Putin. This is Bloomberg.
It's such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging.
We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
Crypto is a nuanced issue, and it's possible the US gets crypto wrong.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Francine Lacqua in London, Matt Miller in Berlin, Katie Lyons in New York. Now, all eyes on Cornwall in the southwest of England over the weekend as leaders from the G7 and European Union met for the first time in 2 years. Now, it comes at a crucial geopolitical moment for the Western allies, marking Biden's first meeting and Angela Merkel's last, with divisive issues like Brexit and China dominating the agenda. Well, joining us now is Peter Westmacott, former UK ambassador to the US, France, and Turkey. He's the author also of the recently published book, They Call It Diplomacy, 40 Years of Representing Britain Abroad. And he joins us today. Peter Westmacott, thank you for joining us. Ambassador, when you look at some of the things that we saw at the G7, this was a united front, but differences remain on how tough they were on China, on how to deal with the vaccines, and on Brexit. Is it more of a united front for the cameras than it is behind closed doors?
Well, morning. Thanks for having me on. I think you're right that there was a nice show of unity, and the second day at least the sun shone, and so we had blue seas and blue sky in Cornwall, which is very nice for the tourist industry there. The communique showed that there was quite a high level of agreement on a lot of things, not perhaps as many vaccines being donated to poorer countries as we would have liked, and perhaps not yet flesh on the bones of a united approach to dealing with the rise of China. Perhaps that would have been a bit much to hope for. Behind the scenes also, there was, in fact, not entirely behind the scenes, also front of stage, there was a bit of a scrap between Boris Johnson and his European colleagues on the whole business of Brexit and the way in which implementing Britain's departure from the European Union with the Northern Ireland protocol to the withdrawal agreement has in fact complicated trading arrangements between Great Britain and the island of Ireland, and that was quite a squabble because after all there were 5 different European leaders who were there in Cornwall, and all of them with an EU perspective on that, and a president in the form of Joe Biden. Yep. First outing to the G7, strong Irish-American links, strong Irish roots, and a great believer in the importance of peace and stability in the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, and actually no fan of Brexit anyway, as he's made clear, and as he seemed to make pretty clear when he was speaking to the media at his bilateral with President Macron of France. So you're right, plenty of things behind they weren't on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, given, and we see beautiful pictures for our wonderful listeners on radio, also of the Queen with Boris Johnson flanked by the G7 leaders. Ambassador, when you look at the most important meeting this week, it's probably Putin-Biden. What kind of tone can we expect from them?
I think the United States President Biden has set out a certain amount of what he expects and doesn't expect from that meeting, and so also has President Putin. He's given an interview as well, as we know. I think the expectations seems to me to be modest. That is to say, the relationship is not in good shape. Both sides admit that. President Biden has said that he wants to get the measure of where President Putin is coming from, not really get the measure of the man. He knows him. They've been around the block, both of these two, for a long time. But I think that President Biden will want to be pretty firm on what he regards as unacceptably bad behavior from Russia, whether it's cyber warfare, whether it's interference in democracy, whether it's supporting state-sponsored hijacking of civilian airliners, or whether it's about murdering political opponents or journalists who ask too many questions. There's all that out there, and that will be important. And I think that the president will want to find a way of dealing with Russia, but he will not pull his punches on those difficult issues.
Ambassador, with that laundry list of behaviors from President Putin, Is there still so much support other than Germany for this Nord Stream 2 pipeline? I mean, this country, the largest economy in Europe, essentially wants to help fund or will be helping to fund those activities, even if they don't want to.
Outside Germany, I honestly don't know, Matt, whether this is something that people feel very strongly about. What I have sensed is that from the Washington perspective, although Secretary Blinken and the President and others have made pretty clear that they don't think this is a good idea, I sense that they're backing off a bit in that the project is almost complete, that Germany doesn't seem willing to back down, that this is not something the United States would like to do because it essentially supports the Russian economy, but that maybe there are other ways in which like-minded countries can work together on addressing the problems of Russia.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Peter Westmacott, there, former UK ambassador to the US, France, and Turkey. Now, coming up, back to work, Goldman Sachs employees set to return to the office, and we're live at the bank's headquarters in New York. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
This is a market that, over the past few weeks, has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance Early Edition. I'm Kaylee Lyons in New York with Francine Lacqua in London and Matt Miller in Berlin. Well, Wall Street is returning to the office, and U.S. Goldman Sachs employees are set to return to the bank's Lower Manhattan Tower today, while the target date for the U.K. staff is June 21st. Shonali Bassett, Bloomberg Wall Street reporter, joins us now with more from West Street on a very rainy Manhattan morning. Shonali, what's the scene like on the ground?
Yeah, people are just starting to trickle in, but I've been told that Goldman Sachs expects a long line as employees, and this is my public service announcement, have not yet downloaded the app, that they need to attest that they've had their vaccinations or have not traveled to a place with a lot of COVID or have been exposed to people with COVID. Kaylee, it's an emotional day. This is not just in New York. This is across the United States that Goldman Sachs is planning to bring back thousands of employees. And honestly, it's a big day that a lot of employers will be watching. As we know, they're a very early employer to be doing such a thing. And in New York, they're really one of the first.
I'm sure that a lot of employees, Shonali, are happy to come back if they've been working from home for a long time. It's a great change of pace. But will they want to come to the office 5 days a week? Is that what's expected of them?
It's really interesting. They are asked to come back. Goldman Sachs has said that, they're really an in-office. And by the way, many of the banks, they're not in the business of FaceTime. They work better together. With that said, there are exceptions, including for today. It's not everyone that's coming back. It's on a team-by-team basis. Some teams, I've been told, have been asked to bring some people back, but not everybody, depending on the space they have in that team. We know that this building has been at about 30% occupancy until this point. We'll know at the end of today what the occupancy will end up looking like ultimately. And we know that employees who are asking for flexibility for childcare reasons or other reasons, they are being given that flexibility.
Shonali, thanks so much. Shonali Basak there in front of GS headquarters in Manhattan, and she'll be there for us throughout the day. Now look at what else we're watching today. And Kaylee, you're watching crypto.
And Elon Musk's Twitter feed, Francine, because the two things are not mutually exclusive. Of course, Elon Musk moved Bitcoin last night with a tweet that he's going to allow transactions with Bitcoin for Tesla when mining becomes a little bit more clean energy focused. So we're hanging right around that $39,000 level on Bitcoin. So I'll be watching that throughout the day, Matt.
I am watching NATO, and I have to say it's so fascinating sitting here in Berlin, the former heart of the Cold War, to watch this group now a lot more loosely aligned than it once was. Here you see Chancellor Angela Merkel coming into the NATO summit. Some hailed her formerly as the head of the free world. She really ruled the G20 summit in Hamburg. That may change now that President Biden is back, so it's going to be interesting to get the tone of this confab.
Matt, what I'm watching is, of course, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, set to delay the full reopening of the UK. It was meant to be for June 21st. This could be delayed by up to 4 weeks. This is because of the resurgence of the Delta variant, which has really forced the team of Boris Johnson to rethink their blueprint for ending the social distancing rules. Again, it just goes to concerns that this rapid rise in COVID cases could put hospitals under strain. And so the question is the vaccination program with the 12-week delay not the right strategy for the UK? So we'll talk about that throughout the day. Also coming up, more on the Fed. This is Bloomberg.
This group now a lot more loosely aligned. We see America coming to the NATO summit, Taylor as the head of the free world, really ruled the G20 summit. And the President Biden back, so it's going to be interesting by the time.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Countries that entered this crisis with limited fiscal space, with more vulnerabilities, need to be supported for the benefit of the world.
The transparency of the debt burden for the poorest countries needs to be increased. There needs to be fuller disclosure.
If there's anything we've learned in the last couple of months, it's that you can't just turn on a switch and have the economy come back online.
We, I think, are seeing the face of the new shape of inflation in the post-pandemic world.
It seems like everyone is pricing in this perfect transitory soft landing.
Low inflation, low rates, positive economic growth, and strong earnings. That's a pretty good backdrop for risk-taking.
The Fed has successfully lulled everybody to sleep with the Kool-Aid that they are never really going to focus on inflation.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Ferro, Lisa Abramowitz, and Tom Keene. We welcome all of you to a simulcast on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television. If it's Monday, it must be Brussels. Matthew Miller, let me go to you first. The G7 meeting, what was the score from Germany, and what do we look for in Brussels today?
I am absolutely pumped for today, Tom, because we had the wrap-up of the G7. Now we have the kickoff of NATO. Plus, we've got so much market action around the Fed and the ECB. Carl Weinberg has an excellent note out, and we're going to talk to him. Yeah. So we're going to get through a lot on this Monday morning.
Somebody stopped me on the street this weekend and said, I love obligatory car talk. We'll try to squeeze that into the hour as well. We don't do that with Lisa Abramowitz. We do that with Matthew Miller. Lisa, a lot of international relations in this hour. We have a photo shoot in the next hour in Brussels. Our Maria Tadeo is there. But Lisa, the moment of this market in this week with this Fed meeting, retail sales tomorrow, it's a big week for economics and markets.
Basically, everyone's looking for any guidance from the Federal Reserve that they're going to raise rates. No one's expecting them to announce a tapering kind of program. People are looking, though, at the dots. They're looking at their projections. They're looking at the sense of whether 2023 is the year that they're going to start lifting rates, in which case they have to start tapering in the near term. It is just amazing how much fear there is of complacency at a time at record highs for the S&P. Bond yields near record lows in this question of where the Fed goes next time.
And inflation out there and the many flavors of it. Lisa, Brent crude 73.34. That's not where it was a week ago.
No, you could just see that grind higher. And yet lumber prices saw their big drop last week, one of the biggest in the past recent years. There's a question here of whether the Fed is correct. Is this transitory? And what is the risk if they're not? Mohamed El-Erian with a column in the Financial Times saying that the Fed is allowing financial risk to build so much with its complacency that the Fed risks a very hard landing if they have to raise rates faster than people expect later on.
Matt Miller, is there angst on transitory inflation in Germany?
Unbelievably, there really isn't. I mean, we've seen the numbers tick up, and we're expecting them to keep going in the relatively near term. But, you know, watching the Bundestag, watching the financial news, just, you know, the local news here in Berlin, there isn't a lot of talk or really concern, and there's not any out of the Bundesbank either.
No, we see it in the United States, certainly in used car prices, and some of the images over a busy weekend in a recovering Manhattan were really something. Let's do the data now. Matt Miller, help me out here. Futures up 5, Dow futures up 29. The grind higher in prices continues. Matt Miller, the VIX 15.90. What do you see in the data?
Well, the interesting thing I see is the yields. I mean, even though the 10-year yield is coming up a little bit, and we see yields here coming up a little bit, these levels are so low, it just shows you that the risk around central banks this week is incredibly asymmetric.
We set to the real yield. Of course, the 10-year real yield, for those who keep score, 0 negative 0.89%. That was a 9-handle earlier, so that's a little less negative than it was maybe on Friday or Thursday. In the commodity complex, I looked carefully this morning, and it's a churn, but with weaker commodity prices. Dollar pretty much stasis. The euro 121.13, and the yen 109.68. She has a brief. Here's Lisa Abramowitz.
Thanks so much, Tom. We're going to be watching the NATO summit, which does take place in Brussels today. Key question, how much is this countdown to President Biden's meeting with Vladimir Putin on Wednesday? How much is he going to try to come to some sort of consensus with the allies ahead of that? I personally am also really interested to hear any details in how the NATO nations are going to create some sort of rival to the Belt and Road Initiative of China. That was one of the key issues that really didn't have a lot of clarity coming out of the G7. 11:45 a.m., Morgan Stanley's Jim Gorman, the CEO, will be speaking at a conference held by the bank. I want to understand how quickly people are spending their cash piles in the bank. This is one of the key question marks underpinning this economic recovery. We'll get some kind of view in that tomorrow with the retail sales data coming out in the United States. But still, really the big question mark is, do the people who have cash in the bank have the intention to spend? And Tom, I just, on that note, today Goldman Sachs is also holding its staff, having them all come back, or most of them anyway, and they are requiring people to report their vaccination status. This, to me, is going to be a test. They're one of the first companies globally to say, guys, come back. We're done with the work from home experiment. The question is, what are the roadblocks going to be? How much are people going to want to come back? Is this going to be an employee retention issue? And then, of course, are they going to be more productive? Are other banks going to see, oh, wait a second, actually, when there is camaraderie, do people want to come back? Does this keep employees, and are we better and more profitable?
I'm so glad you brought this up, Lisa. To me, and Shonali Basak, folks, is on site at Goldman Sachs. We'll go to her in a bit. But to me, Lisa, this is a huge cultural statement by Goldman Sachs. The partnership, obviously it's not a partnership anymore, but the partnership is known from the Weinberg family as saying, we're different, we're working, let's go. Oh, bonus round, we have breakfast and dinner for you today.
And music outside the headquarters. We're getting treated just fine, Tom.
Get dinner tonight? Do I get the surveillance dinner tonight?
If you stick around until then. I will just note one other thing. There was a survey that showed that younger employees actually want to come back to the office because they feel like they are being left behind. There was a survey that showed about two-thirds
don't get me going.
Coming back.
Matt Miller, where are you on this? Come on, weigh in here. I can't say anything because I'll get in trouble. Where are you on this, Matt Miller?
You know what? Here, I mean, I have never worked from home before. So for me, the office is the only thing I know. I just can't believe that others who have been working from home for a year are going to be back for 5 days a week.
Well, we've got the NATO disbursement, our Maria Tadeo in Brussels as well. Mr. Trudeau getting out right now. We'll give you some of this feed. The feed here is not as scripted and planned for those of you on television as it is. It was in Cornwall where we could really sit on a scene. Here it's a little bit helter-skelter. The gentleman from Canada arriving here for NATO. And, of course, back to 1949. I was stunned.
That hair.
Well, thank you. You like my hair, Matt? That's good. Very good.
Lovely head of hair, Tom.
Thank you. I've been working on it. If Miller loves my hair.
I was talking about Trudeau.
I'm sorry. I thought the day peaked early here. Speaking of hair, let's go to someone well-groomed. Carl Weinberg joins us with High Frequency Economics and is wonderful at the treatment of international economics. Carl, George Saravelos leads his note this morning at Deutsche Bank by saying, yes, it's a V-shaped pandemic recovery, but we are heading now to a steady state. Does high-frequency economics see a V-shaped boom, or do you see a steady state?
Well, Tom, good morning. First of all, we've already seen a lot of the V-shape that I think we're going to see. The low-hanging fruit has been picked. The firms that are easy to reopen are reopening. People are coming back to the workplace. Households will probably, as we'll see in the retail sales report this week, pivoting their spending back over toward goods. Services away from the goods that they haven't been able to, services that they haven't been able to buy. And so I think that we are going to move to a steady state. The question for the market is that steady state a state of inflation, or is it a state of just transition? Do we go back to where we were before? And that's the concern that I have, that we're going back to where we were before.
Carl, everyone wants to know, because of the acclaim of your China note. I know Lisa and Matt want to go a different way, but I really have to ask you about the Pacific Rim boom I see priced in so many places. Does High Frequency Economics believe an enduring Pacific boom?
Yeah, I think we have to look at, first of all, the Pacific as a medium-term proposition. That's the part of the world that's growing fast. That's the part of the world that has further to go before it starts to run into obstacles. And of course, in this recovery, we're going to see a lot of increased demand for imports as demand rises faster than supply. That's the flip side of the inflation conversation. And these countries make stuff that we want to buy. So yeah, I think that the Pacific Rim is a place to look for to outperform what we're seeing in Europe and in North America.
So, Carl, one thing that you've been really vociferous about is that perhaps there isn't that much to worry about the inflationary impulse that we're seeing. And yet you have Matt Miller rightly talking about the asymmetry of risks coming out of this Fed meeting. Why is the Fed right? Why is it the best way to go here, allowing inflation to run hot at a time when at least the near-term data shows a very significant surge in inflation?
Well, I think Matt has the right idea talking about asymmetry of risks. That's a great conversation. But the question is, what risks are most important to the Fed and what risks are most important to the world economy? Is an overshoot on inflation a more important risk than an undershoot on where we go with jobs? Right? In other words, what scares the Fed more? A persistently high unemployment rate or a touch of inflation that it tells us many times over and over again it has plenty of tools to manage should it occur? I think that the Fed's number one problem is inflation right now in terms of the things that not inflation, is unemployment right now in terms of the things that they're looking at. I think the Fed, along with every other central bank in the world, has stated its objectives of getting the unemployment rate to the point where it supports persistent price increases near the inflation targets. And we're not there yet. We have some transitory price increases. I've got 4 standards that I would apply if I were sitting on the Fed to the data that we're seeing. Yeah. And one of the most important ones right now is persistence. Do we think used car prices are going to be rising as fast 3 or 4 months from now as they did last month? And the answer is no. We're seeing a surge of demand. Yes, we're seeing a shortage of supply. Yes, prices are rising. That's normal. But is this a persistent rise in prices that's going to run on for months or years? I don't think so, and I don't think they think so.
I have to tell you, Carl, who do I pay to get your research, to get on your mailing list? Because your note framed up my day so well. I get the best research when I come on Tom Keane's show.
Weinberg's been doing that since Lehman Brothers, at the founding of the nation.
I can tell.
Folks,
he's a little jaded, Carl Weinberg, when it comes to the G7. Do we get no surprises out of these kind of meetings? Is it really all predetermined?
Matt, for the first time in the 30...
Oh, I think you froze him. Let it go. Let it go. Okay, we did that. Matt, you froze him in his tracks. What's so great here? Lisa, let's dive in here because this is really important, folks. What's so important is the guests all have different characters of their notes, and they're different. And as Matt points out, the Weinberg high-frequency economic note is brilliant. And Lisa, what's so important is the concept of international economics from Dr. Weinberg, and he always folds it in to full faith and credit debt. And that's the shock you were talking about in your brief this morning.
And actually, if you take a look at what's going on right now, you could see that the dollar weakening has actually brought in a lot of international investors to the treasury markets. You're getting a much greater foreign bid. To talk about pairing the international picture with full faith and credit, the idea that low bond yields make sense based on where we're seeing the rest of the world in terms of growth, in terms of demand, in terms of income. And this, to me, really is the key question. Can one nation get inflation without all of them at this point, given how interconnected the world economy really is, Tom?
Oh, it is. And again, it goes back to currency as the global litmus paper. Matt Miller, really one of the important things of this month has been the stasis of euro. It's frozen under 122.
Absolutely. We have some of the same issues that you have. And the key for me that I keep coming back to is the savings rate that we read about. The Volckers-Landau note had a lot about how this pent-up savings is going to drive the growth and inflation, both here in Europe and in the U.S. And I just don't know, how broad-based is that savings? How do they, how do they really measure it? Are my GameStop shares savings?
No, that's not savings as well. Let's show I want to show the image now in Brussels as we can do this. The camera's jumping around a lot. But our surveillance research has shown that the blue carpet in Brussels, it starts in Luxembourg. The leaders get out of the car in Luxembourg and they walk the blue carpet all the way to Brussels. Look at that. It looks like the Oscars.
It's the Olympics. It's the Olympics of
thank you. And I'd
global
like to
meetings.
thank my director and my producer and the rest. The president is in Brussels after seeing the Queen yesterday. He was not out in front of the Queen. It was elegant. Stay with us, our Maria Tadeo in Brussels. Good morning. This is Bloomberg.
Cover new releases each week that include behind-the-scenes storytelling with conductors including music director Andres Nelsons, guest composers and musicians, plus critically acclaimed archival concerts and more. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsored by Bank of America.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
I think you're going to see just straightforward dealing with China. And again, we're not looking, as I've told Xi Jinping myself, I'm not looking for conflict. Where we cooperate, we'll cooperate. Where we disagree, I'm going to state it frankly. I think there's plenty of action on China, and there's always something that you can, I'm sure my colleagues think there's things they think they could improve, that they want it, but I'm satisfied.
The President of the United States at Cornwall, most of the report cards say he had a very successful G7 meeting, on to Windsor Castle and now on to Brussels. It is a different Brussels than our stereotype from our youth. NATO is 30 countries, including Northern Macedonia. The only one in Bloomberg that knows the name of every 30 nations is our Maria Tadeo, and she joins us right now in Brussels. Maria, my first question is back to Cornwall and then on to Brussels. With Ms. van der Leyen there, how does the European community, the EU, the EC, and your Brussels, how does it fit into the G7 continuity? How does von der Leyen fit in around the table at Cornwall?
Well, Tom, she does represent the Commission, which is becoming incredibly powerful in Brussels and in Europe. So essentially, to get anything done in the European Union, you need the French, you need the Germans, and then you will need Brussels. And she is that person. She represents the Brussels voice. Also, you need to remember that she was a minister for the German military, the German army in the Merkel government. So she does know a lot about this topic. So, it is relevant to have her there to some extent.
As usual, Maria, you absolutely nailed it with her defense heritage of Germany and Afghanistan front and center today. I'll be blunt. What do the nations want from the President of the United States on his unilateral exit from Afghanistan?
Well, look, Tom, I have to say from this, we haven't really heard anything, and that's very significant. So far we haven't heard anything in the Afghanistan dossier. We really haven't heard anything on the spending. The real focus for the countries of NATO, especially the Eastern Europeans, and I'm thinking about the Lithuanians.
Vladimir Putin in Moscow. What does everybody else think about this thing, other than the U.S.? We know what they think.
Yeah. Well, look, Matt, we know that there's been a lot of pushback on the Nord Stream. We know that Eastern European countries have, by the way, made money by transfer fees, and now are not going to make money on that because this is a direct pipeline from Russia into Germany, have been concerned. But what I would say is this is a much more nuanced story. It's not about Germany wanting to make dealings with the Russians. The Germans have to build this thing because otherwise it would get into a big legal confrontation. What they're now looking to do with the United States is to minimize the impact of the Nord Stream pipeline. So essentially looking at something that will reduce the quota that they can import, perhaps compensate some of the Eastern European countries that are now losing money as a result of this pipeline. So they are trying to find a way out of this that means the construction stays, but the capability from that Nord Stream pipeline is reduced to the bare minimum.
Maria, there's a tension here that the Nord Stream issue kind of highlights, which is the economic concern paired with the international human rights and trade concerns on a more sort of global and existential level. We saw that tension in cold relief during the G7, with Europe pushing back against some of the more hardline kinds of rhetoric coming from the United States. Where are we in that? Are we going to see anything, any development in building on what was discussed at G7 at the NATO summit?
Yeah, look, and it goes for Russia and it goes also for China. But what the Europeans say, and it's important to also get their perception in here, is that they're not soft on China. They don't say they want to be soft on China or Russia. The dynamics of the European economy are different to that of the United States. Therefore, politics need to be different. To some extent, China has got to be a rival, but also a partner in some issues. So for them, it's hard to just take this American line all the way without thinking about the repercussions that it will have on Europe. And it's this idea that they want to be autonomous in their policy, too, that Europe just doesn't want to follow everything that the United States have to say, especially coming after 4 years of President Trump.
Maria, what is the tension point for General Wynkoff, the Supreme Commander of NATO? What is his tension point at these meetings?
Well, I think that, as always, and this is a recurring theme, he's going to want to get a very clear assurance that everyone stands by Article 5, that if there's aggression against one, there will be an aggression against everyone, and that principle will stay. President Biden is already saying that is sacred for the United States, which is a very different tone to President Trump, who was very ambiguous. And also, he's going to want to see money. You know, they need to modernize and have a tough army with that, and that costs money. Maria
Tadeo, thank you. At the end of the long blue carpet in Luxembourg, I think this morning, Maria Tadeo with all of our coverage from Brussels as well. Lisa, I look at NATO through the prism of, all that we grew up with, and it's changed and all that, but it's still, at the end result, the remains of World War II.
Yes, and there's a question of how much unity remains today in the relevancy of this current world going forward. And I do think about the idea of China and the lack of, frankly, coherence with respect to the view coming out of G7. And I think it's interesting, the idea of the competing plan against Belt and Road. How do you reach out to all those nations? Key question.
The President of the United States with a former Prime Minister of Norway, Mr. Stoltenberg, as they begin their NATO bilaterals as well. Matt Miller, to me, the major announcement in America this week, as we saw President Biden unmask, is Apple stores will let you in now without a mask on. I thought that was sort of a sea change retail announcement.
I mean, you know what? As you watch the sea change, at least in the West, Tom, keep your eye on the UK because they now have to delay their reopening. And the question is 4 weeks enough or should it be longer?
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. And I'll be honest, folks, I really don't understand it. I've read a couple of the articles trying to understand it, and I've gone down in flames twice. Futures up 3 Dow, futures up 15, the VIX 15.93. Lisa, sort of stasis this morning, don't you think? Like
well, I mean, honestly, again, this question about complacency. We're going toward a new record high, but we're just inching up every day. Did you think that wasabi was cute?
I did. I thought that the dog delivered the good. This is the Pekingese at the Westminster Dog Show, and wasabi nailed it.
No spectators.
That's the dog, folks. That's not,
The breeder, hold on a second. The breeder said he can have a filet mignon and I'll have champagne. He's going to carry him around as much as he needs.
These are truly the imperial dogs of the Chinese royalty of a good 150, 200 years ago. Gifts to J.P. Morgan and Alice Roosevelt, among others. And then they were propagated. I think wasabi says the Abramowitz couch mat. What do you think?
Seriously, we're back to trying to get me to get a dog for my kids.
I think she definitely needs a dog of some sort, and that one looks fitting.
You gotta reach the puppy cut.
Pay the bills and walk it.
We'll have more from the Westminster Dog Show. This is Bloomberg.
Temperature rise within reach.
The train has left the station. Investors care about it. America care about these issues. And certainly we see that the broader community.
There's not enough tax in the world for private sector to pay for all of this. It's going to have to be a public-private partnership.
Bloomberg surveillance puts global markets into perspective.
We're going to try to fold an economic theory here with what we've got.
Based on data.
The focus is going to be on the data, the manufacturing data.
How the market responds will be really interesting.
Timely conversations.
Part of getting out of this hole is big fiscal.
Keeping you up to date on trends.
When do you take this thing off?
So you put it on to take it back off.
Wake up with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz. Weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
Good Monday morning, Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom Keene with John Ferro and Lisa Abramowitz. Mr. Ferro is off. Matthew Miller from Germany this morning and from Berlin as well. There's a NATO meeting on a quick market blush here. A little lift is persistent lift to the equity markets. Futures up 3, the VIX 15.93. The yield, I'm going to say stasis, as Lisa mentioned, 1.46%, a little bit higher yield. Oil, $73. I've lost it there. There it is, $73.23 on Brent crude this morning. Right now, as we consider the distance from Cornwall to Brussels, Robert Hormats joins us. He's the Tideman Advisors. Ambassador Hormats, of course, is public service to the nation for Republicans and for Democrats as well. Ambassador, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. I want to go back to one of the chapters of your wonderful book, The Price of Liberty, The First Great Test. What is the first great test for President Biden when he meets with Mr. Putin?
Well, he has to demonstrate that the United States is going to be much more resolute in resisting various cyber attacks that come from Russia or are perhaps sponsored by the Russian government. We're trying to sort out which is which. But certainly we have been plagued by lots of cyber problems coming from that country, either directly through the government or indirectly by people on that territory. And these not only are disruptive in themselves, but portend the prospect of things getting even worse or escalating, and that could be very disruptive to American companies and to the overall American economy. We're very cyber vulnerable because we're so connected.
Can we be cyber offensive?
I'm sure we have been. I'm also sure that when we do it, we don't say anything. And the reason is that we don't want other countries, not just Russia, but any other country, to understand how we do it, what we're doing, and what our technology is. But we certainly have the technology to be more offensive, and they know that. And I think that there is at least some sense that if they go too far, the United States can take action against them, and it could be very disruptive because they have a weaker economy. The problem is that we're a very connected economy, and therefore a lot of things can happen here in one area, say electricity, which could shut water supplies down or transit systems down or energy systems down. So the world's in a very precarious place if we start getting into cyber attacks on one another.
Ambassador, how much unity is there among the G7, among the G30 in combating cyber attacks together, in working together to make sure that networks are up to speed and protected and that information is shared?
Well, I would put it this way. We have a long way to go. There are different countries who are vulnerable in different ways. As you've seen, some Central and European countries have already borne the brunt of this. And there is really not, I think, a collective doctrine of collaboration or of what constitutes an attack that requires retaliation. The other problem is sourcing and what they call attribution in this world. And you sometimes don't know where the cyber attack actually is coming from or who the perpetrator is. So that makes it more difficult as well. But I think the vulnerabilities are becoming increasingly apparent. And there is going to be, and NATO is probably the vehicle for doing it and for getting this together. But we don't know as much about how these are done, where they're coming from. And we certainly don't have a doctrine of specific retaliation for specific kinds of attacks. But we know things are getting worse, And if we're going to stop them, we have to improve our defenses, which, as you've seen in certain instances, have not been all that good. In fact, they have been inadequate. And we also need them to know that if they don't deal with things that come from their government or from on their territory, we will have an opportunity and a will to take more action that can be very disruptive to them.
Bob, there's a question. The reason why I ask this is not just about cyber, but there's a broader point here, leaving the G7, heading to the NATO summit. There was a lot of disagreement about how hard of a line to take with China, how hard of a line to take with Russia. But my eyes really are on China, given the predominance in the global economy. Where are the biggest question marks there in terms of getting some sort of unified strategy in how to interact with China?
It's a great question, and there is not a clear answer because the Europeans are concerned with certain things, certainly Chinese trade policy, intellectual property protection, an unlevel playing field that favors China vis-a-vis American companies, but European companies. But the problem is that companies in Europe and countries in Europe are very vulnerable. They have become very dependent on the Chinese market. That's been cut back somewhat. But if they take very tough action against China, for instance, German cars, which do very well in China, are vulnerable in other German products. The United States is in a somewhat different position. The Europeans are not so concerned about the strategic strength of China. The East China Sea, the South China Sea, and many of the geopolitical and geostrategic issues in the Pacific that we're concerned about don't so much trouble the Europeans. They're more concerned about the human rights issues. They're more concerned about trade issues. They don't want an all-out trade war or an all-out confrontation with China. The United States has a lot of geostrategic and geopolitical issues. We have a Navy there. The Europeans don't. So we have a wholly different set of issues on the strategic side. We're similar to them, and we have similar concerns on the economic side and the human rights side. So my guess is if there's to be some measure of unity, it's really in those areas, not in the geopolitical ones. We're trying to get them to take a tougher line on China, but they are also concerned about their economic vulnerability and are much more reticent to do that.
Do we risk, by the way, pushing China and Russia closer together, Bob? How strong is that relationship?
Well, we've already in part done that because it is. I mean, the Russians and the Chinese have had their issues over time. In fact, the first opening between the United States and China came because the Chinese and we perceived a Russian threat to China along the Ussuri River, and there were numerous Russian divisions on the Chinese border. So it hasn't been a particularly comfortable relationship from time to time. But now they're beginning to realize that if they want to deal with the United States and resist some American pressures, they're going to probably have to work together. And that's what they're doing. And I do think that has happened already. And the risk is that it will happen even further. The other thing is that other countries in the middle feel they don't want to be caught, like a lot of the Asians, between the United States and China.
I wanted to ask about that, Bob. The last time I sat on set with Tom Keene in person, there was an attempted coup d'etat on Erdogan, which he fought back and brushed off pretty quickly. How does Turkey fit into NATO right now? I mean, they do have the second largest army in the alliance, but they don't really see eye to eye with the U.S.
Well, they don't on numerous issues, Syria being one of them, northern Iraq being another, the Kurds being another, and that's part of the Syria and northern Iraq issue. On the other hand, the Turks are extremely valuable. Their bases are very important to the United States in resisting Russian pressure. The Turks have made, Erdogan and Putin have both made efforts to try to improve relations, which they have done. But they still want the assurance that the United States is going to be there if relations with the Russians deteriorate. I think that question that you asked is an important one. Are we going to be, and is NATO going to be resolute with Putin moving more and more troops up into central Europe, not across the border necessarily, but the troops have gone, many troops have gone up close to the border. So there's a feeling of unease among the NATO countries. I think one of the tests in the NATO summit today is going to be, are we all committed to Article 5, and what would we do if there were incursions in Article 5 countries, that is to say NATO countries, and what will we do if there are incursions into other countries that are not in NATO, but whose interests are important to the United States. So the question of how do you convince Putin to be restrained is going to be a critical one. And are there ways of improving relations with Russia over the next several years? The Europeans would like that to see that happen also.
We're out of time. We'll do it again. Robert Hormats, thank you so much. Ambassador Hormats of the Tideman Advisors, and I can't say enough about his books on the United States and our diplomacy over the years. Lisa, on the markets, I looked at oil. We didn't get to a 74 level on Brent crude. That would be something to see. I mean, you talk about inflation, and it's transitory until you have to fill up the Hummer.
Yeah, well, then it might be transitory how long you have that Hummer. We'll ask Matt Miller about that in our Car Talk session. There is a question, though, also on how much this has to do with the new Israeli leadership coming on board and the hard line to Iran and the nuclear accord that was drawn up in 2015. There is a question of how quickly and whether that supply will come back into the market, affecting the supply-demand balance, Tom.
Yeah, we'll touch on this through the day. I know David Weston will do a lot of work on Israel and the changing of the guard of Mr. Netanyahu. As well later today. Lisa, the other idea I see is corporations with Goldman Sachs returning, and Sonali Basak is down at Goldman Sachs this morning. The idea of a Wall Street that will move forward, and that means the issuance of corporate debt. To me, it has to be truly a record year for any kind of issuance of debt.
Well, it already has been, and it will likely continue to be, whether people are in the office or not in the office. And frankly, there is a question, though, about how speculative some of that issuance becomes. I'm thinking in particular of the MicroStrategy bonds, with the proceeds going to buy Bitcoin, or the proceeds of other bonds going to leverage buyouts.
You don't see that as a sure thing?
What?
You don't see that as a sure thing?
Well, it's already happening.
Buying Bitcoin.
Right.
No,
look.
You see it as speculative. Actually, I mean, I thought it was fascinating. You get a 6.5% return on those bonds.
Yeah, and there's a question of why somebody isn't just buying Bitcoin directly, get the upside.
I'm lost by that conversation. All I know, let me give a quote on Bitcoin to save me here. 39,000 on Bitcoin. Matthew Miller had a good weekend. Coming up, more from Brussels. Our Maria Tadeo is there for the meetings of the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. Stay with us on NATO, on the markets. This is Bloomberg.
With the First Word News, I'm Ritika Gupta. President Biden is in Brussels for the NATO summit. His presence at the meeting comes as a relief to many, and the leaders will tout, quote, a new chapter in transatlantic relations, according to a draft of the summit communique seen by Bloomberg. This is the first NATO summit since the presidency of Donald Trump, who questioned NATO's utility, sparking fear he could withdraw the U.S. from the alliance. The U.S. is approaching 600,000 deaths from COVID, even as new fatalities, infections, and hospitalizations continue to plummet nationwide. The vaccination drive has slowed significantly, but the country is largely reopening. Daily deaths have fallen from a peak of more than 5,000 in February to an average of about 300 over the last week. And Benjamin Netanyahu is already plotting a comeback. The Israeli leader was voted out of office on Sunday, replaced by a shaky governing alliance beset by deep internal divisions. Netanyahu issued a pointed warning as he addressed parliament in his last moments as prime minister, saying, quote, we'll be back soon. The new coalition will govern with the slimmest majorities, commanding 61 of Parliament's 120 seats. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
Trading revenues coming in better than expected. Everything cash, $1.4 trillion of cash. One of the most notable aspects of this report that was stellar.
Right now, about half of U.S. households invest. We'd like to get that number up to 95+%. Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online. It should just be something that people do.
Leaders have pledged over 1 billion doses, either directly or through funding to COVAX. That includes 100 million from the UK to the world's poorest countries, which is another big step.
The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, after a most successful G7 by all accounts, including an attendance by the royal family, and then onward to Windsor Castle as the President of the United States met with the Queen, if you missed that yesterday, as well. We welcome all of you to Bloomberg Surveillance on radio and television, and futures up 4, Dow futures up 5, a churn to the market on Monday, retail sales tomorrow. And then we go on to that important Fed meeting. Look for our Fed coverage to come up. And I believe we're going to start a little bit earlier because there's so much to talk about on the Fed meeting. Right now, we talk about this pandemic, clearly the recovery in New York as well. Novavax headlines out. They will join the line of American vaccines here with some good statistics as well. Gigi Granville joins us with Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security senior scholar. I should say John Farrow's off. Matthew Miller in for us this hour. Dr. Granville, I would suggest New York is in celebration. I would also suggest London is not. What's the difference?
The difference is vaccination. So vaccines are very protective. We are so fortunate that multiple ways to get at a vaccine for COVID have worked, and they're working against all the variants that we're seeing. But you have to be vaccinated. You have to get both your doses if it's a 2-dose vaccine.
So what about the variants? You know, people are always so concerned about variants, and I guess there's a more serious variant now in the UK. Is there a possibility that some of these can overcome a vaccination, perhaps if you've only had one shot of the two?
Yeah, it appears that one shot isn't as protective as two for the Delta variant, the one that originally was detected in India and is going to probably become the dominant variant around the world. So it really is important to get vaccine to everyone. And so these global efforts are so important. And it's also so important in the U.S. to get those shots, and to for younger people who are more vulnerable right now, who are less vaccinated, to get the shots.
What's the vaccination map look like in the U.S.? I hear that it's mostly on the coasts. Everyone is vaccinated from 12 years old and up. But in the middle and flyover country, I say affectionately because I'm from the great state of Ohio, it's less so. Is that because people are, anti-vaxxers in the middle of the country, or is it more difficult to get the vaccine there?
I don't think access is a problem right now in the U.S. anymore for most people. It is still a challenge for some people who can't take off from work, or they're concerned that if they're going to have any effects from the side effects from the vaccine, that they won't be able to take off from work. But every effort should be made by governors to make sure that people know that this vaccine is free and that it will protect them. And if they're able to take the time off, there are multiple places to get vaccine in different places. And, vaccine side effects, while they can be, they can be a pain for a lot of people, it's not everyone who gets these vaccine side effects. About half of people don't have any reaction at all. So people shouldn't make too much out of that and go and get this vaccine that's going to protect them from sickness, from hospitalization, or worse.
Just to mention that the vaccination effort is one of the central efforts by the G7 and now going into the NATO summit, where Mario Draghi is seen walking down the 15-mile blue carpet, as Tom was mentioning earlier. No doubt the COVID vaccinations very much on the forefront of everybody's minds. Dr. Granville, as an increasing number of the population, certainly in the United States and elsewhere, gets vaccinated, a question is turning to the booster vaccines. How long they will be effective. What is the latest thinking on that?
Yeah, the scientific data is a little bit mixed right now. So some of the scientific data is showing a lot of protection from the vaccines that may extend into years, and that there's good memory that for T cells and B cells. So your immune system has lots of components that make sure that it can respond to what it last saw. So it might be that we don't need a booster for some time, but there are options for boosters, including this latest news from Novavax, which would be a very good booster vaccine.
Gigi Granville, thank you so much. We've got to go because of pressing events in Brussels, but we greatly appreciate it. Dr. Granville with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security this morning. Moments ago, Mr. Draghi of Italy speaking. He has had a successful tenure in shifting from monetary duties at the ECB over to driving Italy forward out of this pandemic. That has been a challenge. Establish for us the tourism, Matt Miller, that you see in Europe. Lisa Bramowitz wants to do 3 weeks, sort of like, I think, Italy over to Portugal and then,
Greek islands.
Down to Greek islands or whatever.
Well,
is it going to happen, Matt Miller?
Yes.
I think it could happen depending on the Greek islands for sure. But here, for the most part, people are traveling inside their own country. I will say that my wife every 2 weeks is back and forth to Spain, but it's not terribly easy. You've got to bring all this testing stuff and you've got to have proof of vaccination or whatever. It should, I think, get a little bit easier, probably for Lisa. Maybe for Americans, it's easier.
It is at his time with our agreement with Mr. Miller to appear with us for Jonathan Farrow that we do obligatory car talk, except today we adjust to obligatory dog talk. And I look at this obligatory Pekingese talk. I look at this map, but you are one of the people that actually acted on this. You saw a Westminster dog show and ponied up for the dog.
Yeah, I absolutely. We had one of the executives of the Westminster Kennel Club on the program 10 years ago, and I asked him for a Rottweiler breeder. He pointed me in the right direction, and I ended up with Steven. And Steven is...
Who names their dog Steven,
Such a good boy.
Matt Miller.
Such a good boy.
Lisa, you name your dog after the richest grandfather and then some alcoholic beverage. I mean, that's
the Tom Keene household. I love that Matt Miller saw the little poofy creatures that are perfectly trained. So, Matt, in our obligatory dog talk, is Steven as well trained as Wasabi?
No, definitely not. He's very loving with people, but if he saw Car on the street, havoc would ensue.
Yeah, Car's 8 months old and is milking it for all she can. Her name is Car, and we didn't do this, Lisa, but right now I'd say that we named her after a Kardashian.
Oh yeah, or how about a car? Because we can dovetail dog talk into car talk. I thought it was interesting that Matt Miller pointed out that Mario Draghi arrived in a Lamborghini, which I thought was kind of fascinating considering the economic disruptions.
Not that he arrived in a Lamborghini, but that Lamborghinis are almost sold out. The CEO of Lamborghini said that they're almost sold out of the entire... Because Draghi's Italian, Lamborghinis are Italian. You need to buy them for euros.
Cut him some slack, Lisa. It's Monday. Thank you, Matt Miller, for joining us today. I believe Romaine Bostick will save the day in the next hour as well.
We hope.
If you're brave, stay with us for another hour. We are in Brussels with our Maria Tadeo. Guy Johnson is so off today after his wonderful work
and
in Cornwall. Shonali Bassick at Goldman Sachs. This is Bloomberg.
Vietnamese people have shopped at wet markets or mom-pop stores for decades, and now e-commerce companies are trying to change this habit. Those including regional players like Shopee or Lazada or local startups Tiki have been building loyalty and trust by providing Vietnamese with services that are common in developed economies but very new to this country.
Mình chỉ cần ngồi ở một chỗ thôi và lên một cái trang web chẳng hạn thì mình có thể tìm được là rất nhiều cái mặt hàng ở trên đó. Thứ hai nữa là về cái tốc độ giao hàng thì bây giờ cũng đã nhanh hơn rất là nhiều rồi, thậm chí là có những cái mình có thể nhận sau 2 tiếng như Tiki Now chẳng hạn.
The epidemic has given digital retail a boost, with more Vietnamese buying everything from food to electronics online.
Còn một cái nữa đó là tại vì cũng đang dịch ấy, thế nên là nếu mà mua hàng online thì sẽ an toàn hơn cho tất cả mọi người, bởi vì là mình sẽ không cần phải ra ngoài và tiếp xúc với nhiều người.
The country's e-commerce is expected to reach 29 billion in 4 years, from 7 billion last year. The government is also encouraging this sector with target of online shopping to account for 10% of Vietnam's retail sales by 2025.
It's such an interesting new world.
The world is changing.
For us, it's not about being first, it's about being the best.
While everyone is zigging, we're zagging.
We feel like we can maybe help people out more.
We have an enormous number of big ideas.
Crypto is a nuanced issue, and it's possible the US gets crypto wrong.
If there's anything we've learned in the last couple of months, it's that you can't just turn on a switch and have the economy come back online.
We, I think, are seeing the face of the new shape of inflation.